bespoke radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the Global Radio Alliance.
I need your help to get to the year 1985.
You're listening to Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Network.
Good evening, Fade to Black. Bespoke Radio for the masses. That's right. How you doing? Today's Tuesday, April 16th, 2019. 106 days into the new year. 259 days left. That's right. And we are live from a bunker somewhere in the middle of beautiful downtown Burbank, California. And I would like to welcome everybody listening all around the world, all across the United States. Hither and thither, to and fro, back and forth, up and down, east and west, north and south, far and near. This is Fade to Black for KJCR, the Game Changer Network, and KGRA, The Planet. I am your host, Jimmy Church. What is cracking, everybody? How you doing? How you doing? I mean, that's the question, right? My chair's moving. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. Brand new chair. You saw that, right? All right. Let's get the show cracking. It's going to be a great evening tonight. Bruce Fenton is here, live from Wales over in the UK. And we're going to be talking about one of my most favorite subjects, our human origins, our true origins, and human hybrids, or hybrid humans. You say tomato, I say tomato, right? And the alien connection. We're going to be doing all of that tonight with Bruce and talking about the science behind all of this, too, as well. And I love it when we have a show like this. And I just can't wait. Bruce will be with us at the bottom of the hour. And then tomorrow night, psychic and medium Karen Reese is here for the first time. So we have two first-time guests on Fade to Black this week. That's the only way to go, right? And also, tomorrow night with Karen, we will be taking your phone calls. So get ready for that. Tomorrow night, you get one question. One question with Karen. If you try to get in a second question, I hang up. Who's going to get hung up on tomorrow? You know, okay, that's great. That's great. I have one more question. That's it. Boom. Going to love it. I don't hang up. How many times have I hung up on somebody on this show? I think I remember one. Was there two? There might have been two. Think about that. I don't do it often. Somebody give me the chance. Somebody tomorrow night take one. Take one for the team. Take one for the Fade or Not. Say, I've got one more question, just so you guys can test me. I want to test the ability to go click. All right, that's tomorrow night. Karen Reese. I cannot wait for that. It's going to be amazing. And then Thursday night's another Fader Night. Open lines all night long. You can follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. That's right. Facebook, YouTube, everything is Jimmy Church or Fade to Black. It's all easy to do. You can follow, like, and subscribe right over on our website. The Sandbox, where you I did. I hung up on Susie Q. I did not. I would never. Did I? Is that right? I hung up on Susie Q? I don't remember that. Find the audio clip. Send that to me. Oh, man. I never hung up on Susie Q. No. Hashtag F2B is the sandbox. Hashtag F2BQ is fade to black questions. Ziggy just posted up on Twitter, by the way, these Fender Stratocaster like deck shoes. Those things are cool, man. I've got to get, can you get these in single? Because these are HSS. These are humbucker single. I need to get them in single. Oh, man. And they got the pro tremolo. I need the vintage tremolo. Can I get can I get these in sunburst? Can I get these in two-tone sunburst? Is that possible? Can I get it in a maple neck? I wonder. Those things are cool, man. Those things are really cool. I thought when I first looked, I thought those were real guitars until I clicked on the picture. Pretty cool. Thank you for that, Ziggy. You can also email throughout the show, Jimmy@jimmychurchradio.com. Got lots of breaking news. Let's get straight to it. It was announced today. Prosecutors plan to seek up to 10 months in jail for actress Felicity Huffman. Huffman was among 13 parents who agreed to plead guilty last week to a charge of conspiracy to commit fraud. A total of 33 parents have been accused of using their wealth to cheat on standardized tests for their children and bribe college administrators and coaches. Unbelievable. 10 months. Can you see Felicity in jail? Felicity with the tin cup on the bars. Ding, 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 ding. Nobody knows. The trouble I seen. Can you picture Felicity? I bet you she better start. The story is prosecutors are seeking between 4 and 10 months. But she's pled guilty. So that's it. She might be going to jail. Fascinating. Well, the fire is out at Notre Dame, and the damage right now is still being assessed. But the stone infrastructure seems to be largely intact. This is according to all reports today. And donations by French business leaders and businesses for the reconstruction of Notre Dame so far has topped $700 million. French authorities say there is no suggestion at this point that the cause was anything other than accidental, but did confirm that an investigation is underway to identify the precise reason for the blaze. Unbelievable. Now, crazy news today. Authorities are searching for an armed woman in connection with alleged threats that led to the lockouts at Columbine High School and nearly 20 other Colorado schools, officials said earlier today. The FBI Denver Division and the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office identified the woman as 18-year-old Saul Pice. Pice traveled to Colorado on Monday night and made the threats in the Denver metropolitan area. This week, on April 20th, will be the 20-year anniversary of the Columbine High School shooting. Very interesting. So I'll keep you posted if anything breaks during the show tonight. Now, excuse me, Pepsi. Pepsi is in the news. PepsiCo. Pepsi has dropped their plans to use an orbital billboard. PepsiCo's Russian subsidiary was working with a company called Start Rocket to advertise an energy drink called Adrenaline Rush using satellites. And this is the deal. Flying a set of small satellites up in orbit, in formation, reflecting sunlight with mylar sails that would fit together to create logos or, other advertising messages that would be visible from the ground after sunset and before sunrise. How trippy is that? However, there's always a however. However, PepsiCo's headquarters here in the United States said nope and completely shot down the idea. There you go. Billboards in space. Not quite yet. We were close. Well, more Julian Assange news today because apparently he will not face the death penalty in the United States when he is extradited. Now, listen to this. The death penalty, right? Okay, so check this out. The U.S. reportedly gave this assurance to Ecuador during back-channel negotiations to finally evict the activist from the London embassy and face the legal process. It's because Ecuador opposes the death penalty, and it wanted an explicit assurance from the United States that Assange would be spared from capital punishment if extradited. Now, what death penalty for what? Crazy, isn't it? Think about that. They were talking about 5 years, and that's even if he's convicted, and and now what is it that they are ultimately going to charge Assange with once he gets here? Think about that for a second. Pretty crazy, isn't it? All right, in the biggest news of the day. Now, I need you to sit and listen word for word. All right? Are you sitting? Are you listening? Did you move a little closer to your speaker? You should. Because liquid blood has been found inside a prehistoric 42,000-year-old foal, a baby horse. Now, do I need to say that again? Liquid blood. It was preserved in a liquid state for 42,000 years, thanks to favorable burial conditions and permafrost in Yakutia, Russia. Literally, it is the best preserved Ice Age animal ever found in the world ever. 42,000-year-old liquid blood. Think about that. Forget about Jurassic Park and Amber. 42,000-year-old liquid blood. Wow. Amazing. Amazing. And you know what they're going to do? We're going to see 42,000-year-old baby foals. Yeah. You know that's what they're going to do. They have to. It's liquid blood. Think about that for a second. All right. Get the Surfer music streaming app. You need to do it now. Get it on your phone. Go over to jimmychurchradio.com. Click on the banners for the Surfer music streaming app. They're right there. All you got to do is click one more time, and you are listening to all the music that you can handle. You know I love my music, and this is my streaming app of choice. SURFR, Surfer. You can go to surfr.fm, go straight to the website, or click on the banners. It's right there. It's super easy, super fun, super simple. No privacy concerns, nothing, no email, nothing. All you do is download and start listening. Do it today, the Surfer Music Streaming app. Our next event is coming up. It's coming up in a month. Unbelievable. Contact in the Desert, May 31st through June 3rd in Indian Wells, Palm Springs, California, at the Renaissance Indian Wells Resort and Spa. Tickets and info over at contactinthedesert.com. We've got 3 full days of Fade to Black for you. We broadcast Fade to Black Friday night with a live studio audience. Saturday night, I'm hosting the awards dinner, right? The awards dinner. I'll be hosting that. I want all Fadernauts there. You got to get your tickets for that now. And on Sunday night, I'll be hosting the closing night panel that I do every single year there at Contact in the Desert. Then coming up right after that, our 2019 Soul Tech Conference. It's over the July 4th weekend at the Sunrise Ranch in Loveland, Colorado. You can sign up for tickets and info right now over at soultechgathering.com. We teach. This is a teaching conference. All of you Fadernauts together, hanging out. It's going to be amazing. It's July 4th weekend, and we're going to have a cook-off. We're going to have a cook-off. And if you think you can cook better than me, bring it. That's right. soultechgathering.com. All right. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. It is just $2 per month, and now commercial-free. $2 per month. Click on the podcast banner over at jimmychurchradio.com. You can also become a Fadernaut over in our membership section on the site. It's very simple to do. Become an official Fadernaut today. Get yourself some autographed stuff, autographed shirts and hats, all that cool stuff. Plus, commercial-free, downloadable MP3 archives. You will MP3 yourself to death. And that's what you can do right now by becoming a Fadernaut over at jimmychurchradio.com. Let's get the show cracking. Got a lot to do tonight. Happy birthday to today, John Cryer. John Cryer is 54 years old. Now, this is the deal with John. Pretty in Pink, right? Okay, all right. Pretty much stops and starts right there for anybody when it comes to John Cryer. Pretty in Pink, 1986, one of the great movies of all time, right? Okay, we agree on that. And then it was almost 20 years of nothingness for John until Two and a Half Men in 2003, 17, almost 18 years later. That's right, 2003 all the way to 2015. Unbelievable. Happy birthday, John. All right, now our dead guy's birthday today is the one and only Wilbur Wright. 1867 to 1912, died at the age of 45. Co-inventor, pilot of the first flight, right? The first successful airplane, the Kitty Hawk, which he called a flying machine. Wilbur became ill on a business trip to Boston in April 1912, right? 9 years after 1903, historic flight. Just 9 years. That's it, right? The illness was attributed to him eating bad shellfish at a banquet. Some things you can't make up. Well, he died a month later at the family home in Dayton, Ohio on May 30th. Unbelievable. But I hope he's listening. Happy birthday, Wilbur Wright. On this day in history, OTD, 2007, 32 people died after being gunned down on the campus of Virginia Tech by Sung Hui Cho, a student at the college who later that day committed suicide. Fader fact. Okay, here you go. We love Australia here. We love Canada. We love the UK. We love Europe, Central and South America, all of our listeners around the world, even in Dubai, right? We love everybody. But Australia and Fade to Black, they just go together. They do, like tacos and Tuesday. Oh, that's right. It's Tuesday. So check this out. Here's a Fader fact for everybody down under. Australia is home to the largest number of venomous snakes in the world. That's not the Fader fact. The Fader fact is it only averages one fatal snake bite per year. How does that happen? You gotta love it. Australia. Tonight, Bruce Fenton is with us. We're going to be talking about our origins, all of us, and human hybrids, or hybrid humans, whichever way you want to go with this. Tomorrow night, psychic medium Karen Reese is here, and we will be taking your phone calls. Thursday night is another Fader night with open lines all night long. Now, let's get to it. The missing link. The missing link. We've all heard this term since our earliest years. If you think about you at your youngest, I don't care how old you are, think about you at your youngest Think about those conversations, the things that you saw on TV. One of the first things you heard is, where is the missing link? The missing link. The missing link. Where is it? Right? Okay. We're so familiar with the term, but modern academics today tend to dismiss it. They do. And I think it's one of the most important subjects that still needs to be discussed. I'm not going to let it go, but they won't talk about it because they're scared. They are. They don't want to talk about it. Listen, you can't just say that because we humans, today modern humans, us in the now humans, come from anything that has walked on two legs in the past. And that's what they are going to say. They're going to say, hey, look, okay, well, the missing link that you're talking about isn't there. Yeah, but us in academics, us professionals that you trust us to study, we know about DNA. We know about heritage. We know where Lucy came from. We know how Lucy is connected all the way through us. We know this. We don't need the missing link. Now, it's a failed argument. It's like saying that, us and Lucy or anything else that walks on two legs, any other primates, anything else, is the same because we humans walk on two legs and so do they. So therefore, we came from them. And it's like saying, and this is where they are wrong, it's like saying that dogs, cats, lions, horses, camels, elephants, giraffes are all the same. And they must have evolved from the same four-legged creature because they all walk on four legs. And clearly, they are not evolved from, well, you know what? I don't even know. But it's the exact same argument. You need to stop and think about what I am saying. It's so simple. A goldfish, a dolphin, they both swim in water. Therefore, no, it doesn't work that way. We humans, no matter how you slice it, we just appeared. Like magic. We just appeared. Now, how or why, I do not know. I don't. I honestly don't know. But when I look at anything else, I know that we are not like them. Our face, our nose, our chin, our skin, our hair, our forehead, our eyes, our nose, our brain, our forehead. All of this, and when you think about it, all of this just appeared. Like that. It doesn't make any sense. What I do know is there is no missing link. Now, we can look at the possibility of certain things evolving, but when I go back and I look at all of those famous evolutionary drawings, right? The amoeba in the water, then the fish, and then it's crawling on land, and then it's four-legged, and then man. That, and I used to look at that going, you know what? No. I just don't agree with that. And if you take that idea of evolution, Darwin's concept of evolution, we don't fit in that picture. So how did we get here? What happened? The evolutionary process, when you look at Neanderthal, right? And you look at the foreheads, you look at Lucy, you look at any other skulls around the world, look at the jaws, right? Forget about the bones in the body. We can discuss that forever. But just look at now how to get a Neanderthal skull to our skull. the shape, the size, everything else. We're talking about if it was evolutionary, 100 million years. We just appeared here around 150,000 years ago. You can stretch it if you want to 200,000 years. 200,000 years. But before that, there's nothing. Nothing. No missing link and nothing else to indicate anything evolutionary that arrived up to us. It doesn't exist. So how did we get here? What are our true human origins? Are we hybrids? Is there an alien connection? I simply don't have these answers. But that's why Bruce Fenton is here tonight. We're going to discuss all of this, theories and science. And hopefully together, I'll start to get some of these answers, and so will you. That's the best part of this show. So tonight, it's Bruce R. Fenton. Tomorrow night, right here, Karen Reese is here, psychic and medium, another first-time guest. And then, of course, Thursday night is Fader night with open lines all night long. I am your host, Jimmy Church. This is Fade to Black. You can email me right now, jimmy@jimmychurchradio.com. Follow me on Twitter @jchurchradio. All right, we got Bruce up there, too. He's hanging out in the sandbox already, pre-show. I'll be right back live from Wales over in the UK. Our guest, Bruce Fenton. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. This is Fade to Black on the Game Changer Network and KGRA, The Planet. I'll be right back. Stay with us. All right, welcome back. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, Bruce R. Fenton is here. Our human origins. It's going to be a fascinating conversation. Tomorrow night, right here, Karen Reese, psychic and medium, is going to be here and taking your phone calls. And, of course, Thursday night is another Fader night with open lines all night long. But tonight, it's Bruce Fenton. He is the author of the revolutionary Human Origins ebook series, The Forgotten Exodus. He was born in the historic English town of Cheltenham, England, graduated from Anglia Ruskin University in 2002, having studied information systems. He's a world traveler, public speaker. His research activities have featured in UK's Telegraph newspaper and on popular Science Channel shows. He is a current member of both the Paleanthropology Society, say that, and the Scientific and Medical Network. Tonight, we're going to discuss the human origins and his book, The Forgotten Exodus, the Into Africa Theory of Human Evolution, and Human Hybrids, Hybrid Humans, Scientific Evidence of Our 800,000-Year-Old Alien Legacy, written by his wife, Daniela Fenton. And you can follow him on Twitter @HybridHumans144. I would like to welcome for the first time to Fade to Black, Bruce Fenton. Bruce, good evening. Good morning to you, actually.
Hi, Jimmy. It's actually a pleasure to be on. Thank you so much. Yep, it's somewhere in the early hours here in Wales.
Are you drinking coffee or tea?
I was just having coffee, actually. But
yeah, good.
It's not the real deal from you, Jimmy. It's just some cheap coffee from the store.
Hey, if it works, man, if it works. And good morning to you. And Bruce, before we get started, you get the first-time guest disclaimer. So let's get that out of the way. Which is this, Bruce, it's just you and I sitting on my couch having a conversation as friends, and where that conversation starts, it starts, and where it ends, but we're going to end as friends. There you go. You ready?
Great stuff.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yep, thanks.
You know what's funny is when I bring on a first-time guest, I have, I'll talk to them before the show, and so, hey, are you going to give me the disclaimer? And I'm like, oh, you listen to the show, right? It's so cool. I love it. And now this is going to be one of those shows tonight, Bruce. This is something that I'm very, very passionate about, as is our audience. And we have been trying to, figure this thing out for a very, very long time. And I want to ask you directly, as we start to get into this, where did your interest get into this? Because you went to school for IS, right?
Yeah, it's it's not a logical jump, really, computer systems into human origins. No. I kind of regret that in a way, if I'm honest. I wish I had taken, genetics or something now in hindsight. But yeah, some of the skills are relevant, obviously assessing data, seeing the way the data flows in information systems. Some of it is actually useful, but no, I admit that it wasn't that drove me to this subject. I've been interested in ancient mysteries, the paranormal, all of those, all of the good stuff since I was about 10 years old. I'm 42 now. So, it's been a fair while. Last 20 years, very seriously, digging into all of the mysteries. So yeah, I'm a hardened scholar of weirdness.
If you would have taken archaeology or anthropology in school, you would have been kicked out. You know that, right? I mean,
it's a career killer to touch these subjects.
Yeah, because would you have been argumentative, starting to ask the questions that certain teachers or professors are reticent to answer?
Yeah, it's a problem. I would have ended up in arguments, and yeah, it's drinking from the poison chalice, and I think there was an anthropologist that made the mistake of looking at a Bigfoot, print, and that was it. He never managed to get his career off the ground. I mean, so sometimes it can be just one thing they don't like, and they will destroy you.
Why is it that archaeology and anthropology, well, any type of professional history and academics, is about should be about asking questions and seeking the truth, because that's what you're there for. You're trying to get these answers, right? Why do they fight this? I mean, that's the part that I don't understand.
Yeah, it's strange. There is an element there, I think, of people going into this, at least at the beginning, with the idea that, they want to understand something new, they want to understand the story. And at some point they get kind of vibrated into line, and then they find that what they're actually doing is reinforcing the existing story, and that becomes reinforced on them, that's what we do here, So I don't think anyone starts off thinking they're going to be part of that kind of behavior, because you wouldn't go into it, would you?
Well, you would think that would be the case. And I have always, my view of academics has changed over the years. But I always thought, as everybody else did, is that science is about, and in history, is a series of corrections, right? If we go back and we think about the way that they looked at the solar system or the universe 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 400 years ago, and that was based on the best knowledge that they had at that time, but it's been corrected and adjusted. Same thing with human anatomy, right? And all of it is just a series of corrections and modifications. Absolutely. It should be the same approach when it comes to archaeology and anthropology, but they just don't want to listen or pursue the possibility of simple things like panspermia, for instance. I mean, I think it's one of the most obvious solutions to so many questions, but it's pseudoscience.
Yeah, panspermia is a funny one. I do cover that in the book. So, just briefly, we could tackle that because, it's a really strange one because, there's no scientific reason why panspermia shouldn't be considered as a really, the best, model for how life began on this planet. It's the one that fits the data best. And yet, just because it involves something from outside of this planetary system, it becomes, garbage science, which is insane. There's no basis for writing it off as pseudoscience at all. And it really fits well. You've got life appearing here astonishingly early. They now think, right, that it appeared 4.5 billion years ago, right? And the planet's supposed to have formed 4.6 billion years ago. So in 100,000 years, bear in mind, they're saying the planet was just forming a crust. It was still under the bombardment of asteroids, and life appears, Jimmy, just out of nowhere like that. Like there's a seed planted waiting for a surface, So what point do you say, well, the most rational thing is there is a seed, planted? But yeah, no, that can't be it. It can't be it. It has to have just come out of the rocks, out of a rock pool somewhere.
The first time I read about panspermia, I was probably about 10 years old. It was like Time magazine, some article. And I sat back, I was very young, and I thought to myself, that makes sense. That makes a whole lot of sense. That takes out anything about things being accidental, and it was just something to me that seemed so obvious. And the more that I followed up on it over the years and how it's just been called rubbish and, just wacky science, I just couldn't believe how much it was dismissed. And that was my eye-opening, like everybody else when it comes to academia, where they just don't want to pursue this subject.
Yeah, it's a very strange one. I mean, I think it was just a couple of months back that a team of geneticists, they traced the first ancestor of all life, what they call the last universal common ancestor, Luca, and they traced that back to 4.5 billion years, and that's gone along with this other earlier data that was fossils, that were in Canadian rock, So we've got from two different angles. We've got this really early emergence of life. And there is just no conceivable way that in 100,000 years you're going to have something like DNA, emerging from a rock pool. It's totally unreasonable. I don't even know why there's still a conversation, if I'm honest. At this point, it's so glaringly obvious that that's the answer, that it's mind-boggling. Yeah, that we're still having to be told, well, no, that's stupid. How could it be that it comes from space? It's like, well, how can it be that it just comes out of a rock? You know what I mean, Jimmy? Why's that better? It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
I look at everything like most of us do, and I see nearly all elements of life in stasis. I don't see things evolving today that have been on this planet for 50, 60 million years. They're essentially exactly the same as they were 50 million years ago. I don't see those evolutionary changes in anything.
There's fundamental problems in the evolutionary models, right? I mean, there are types of evolution that happen, and yes, we can observe some types of evolution, but as you said, there are species that remain unchanged for incalculable periods. There's obviously the famous example is the coelacanth, this fish that they thought was extinct, tens of millions of years ago. And then they found it. And, not only was it still alive, but it hadn't changed at all. And it was living in an environment which was considered to be like the hotbeds of evolution, those particular areas in the ocean. And they hadn't changed, So you have these problems where, and that's kind of skipped over. And there's quite a lot of animals like that where they don't fit that model. And there are scientists who now are starting to try and say, look, there's obviously parts of this model that we have not grasped, because we shouldn't be seeing some of these things. And then of course there are types of evolution. There's species that mingle, and I say subspecies, whatever. There's adaptions. We now know there's what we call there's epigenetics or feedback loops, and obviously those can make minor changes in an animal. But yeah, when we get to these really big changes, when we have a species leap, I see that as being something being caused by something far more radical than just the occasional mutation and, natural selection. That doesn't really explain it. I mean, we'll be going, obviously into that in more depth, but yeah, there's quite a few holes at the moment in the overarching evolutionary theory.
And we're gonna discuss this as we move forward. But for the audience, when we talk about you, Bruce Fenton, and how you approach things, you look at the science. The science is, now look, going into the fringe and getting that to connect into the science. Okay, well, that's something else that's part of the process. But that's how you base everything, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And, the previous book, the Inter-Africa theory, there's no mention in there of aliens or, ghosts or, anything like that. That's a book that's really sort of intended for your student in the sciences, somebody that I would like to reach now, wake them up to it so they don't go into a career of, maintaining the status quo, that they understand, hey, you're wrong. I use their science papers, I've gone into the academic papers and I use those to build my model so that there's no way they can turn around and say, hey, this is just pseudoscience, right? I've been really careful with that. And that's why, obviously Graham Hancock was willing to write the foreword. And, he says in there that, this book has the potential to rewrite human, history. And you can, Graham's not the kind of guy who's going to put that on the front of a book that he thinks is is just a joke.
Let's get a foundation going here to move forward. I want your point of view on this and your statistics, and my information can be adjusted at any time. Okay, I am by no means a scholar or professional when it comes to this, but let's get a foundation going. Us, sure. When I say us, I'm talking about you and I, modern humans, Homo sapiens sapiens. Us. How long have we been here?
Right. I would break it down into a few different steps. Modern humans, totally modern humans, from what I can see, they don't appear really as exactly as we are, right, until about 70,000 years ago. This is for fully behaviorally, fully anatomically modern humans, okay? But if you go back to Homo sapiens, right, and Homo sapiens, again, can be broken down. But Homo sapiens goes back to at least around what the current definition of Homo sapiens. I have to say this really carefully because there's a really vague definition, right, that's used in science for modern humans and for Homo sapiens. But if you take them back, they typically are considered to go back to 150 to 200,000 years, right? And then you have archaic Homo sapiens. They go back to around 300 to 400,000 years. And then beyond that, you start getting what they just call kind of pre-Homo sapiens, and you get these archaic hominins, right? So it kind of breaks down. But really, us, we come about after 70,000 years ago. And I can go into a bit of why that is. And I'll tell you very quickly, it's because modern humans are a hybrid of various other humans that lived on this planet before 70,000 years ago, right? Because there was an enormous event that happens at 72,000 years ago, and that was the explosion of the Lake Toba supervolcano, right? And this volcano was the biggest eruption in the last 2 million years. The ash cloud drifted across Eurasia, and it encircled the entire northern hemisphere of the planet, bringing on an accelerated, like, nuclear winter, right? And you got to bear in mind, this is in an ice age. So on top of it, you get a nuclear winter. So Eurasia is getting absolutely wiped out, right? So all these humans living there, there's a fair number. You know, you've got your Neanderthals, you've got obviously Denisovans, you've got Red Deer Cave. You've got this. There's quite a. They know now, you know, that there was a lot. It wasn't just one or two. There was a lot, right? Most of them are dying in this event. So what happens is, if you're in a disaster, what are you going to do? You're not going to sit there and die if you can help it. So obviously, some of them are getting displaced. And as these different groups get displaced, what do? They bump into each other, right? They start mixing. The survivors go into, there's only two places you can really go. You have to go below the equator, right? So there's only two places. You can end up in sub-Saharan Africa, so, you know, south of the equator there, or in Southeast Asia. They're moving down into the equator and down into Indonesia and Australasia, right? So you've got these mixing pots. And that's why I say modern humans don't really come about until after this, because we're actually, and you've probably seen this in the recent news, it keeps coming up. We've got another lineage and another lineage. You know, we're part Denisovan, we're part Neanderthal, we're part this, we're part that. And that's because these groups have been forced together after this apocalypse, right? But before that, there was Homo sapiens, but they are slightly different to us. You can see the skull shape and things is slightly different. So there's different kinds of Homo sapiens.
The question of, again, I need this for a foundation. The question of Neanderthal or Cro-Magnon when it comes to Homo sapien sapien, my eyes don't see the similarities. And I just don't see it. Just because we are alike doesn't mean necessarily that there was crossbreeding or a heavy amount of it. But the other issue I have is the overlapping of the dates, because Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal stretched all the way up to, 30,000 years ago, 35,000 years ago, without having, it's not like we have an entire subspecies of Homo sapien sapien magnon, right? If you know what I'm saying here. I don't see that. How much of it did occur, number one, and two, was crossbreeding even possible? Was it, with the eggs and sperm, would they match and actually create? Because it's very complicated.
Yeah, I mean, yes, there was mixing. There was mixing on at least 2 or 3 points in the timeline. About 50,000 years ago, around about 270,000 years ago. And I think somewhere in the middle there, I think it's about 120,000. You've got like 3 points where there's been mixing between Neanderthals and what is the lineage that leads to modern humans, right? But the thing I say something here, there's a good reason why. If you look at the imagery that they generate now of Neanderthals, and you look at it, obviously they've got the big brow ridges, they've got the heavy set jaw, there's noticeable physical differences, right? For a long time, we didn't really understand why that was. We thought it's because there's such a different, species, or even if you say subspecies, but they were so different. And actually, it turns out the reason why they look like that, and this is quite weird, is that due to epigenetics, and I'll just quickly say to you, epigenetics basically is like a feedback loop, that when things happen to you, or, you live in a certain kind of environment, your DNA is kind of clever enough to respond to that. And you actually can have things start to change even in your own lifetime. And some of these changes will pass on to your children. Now, they're usually a bit subtle, right, but over time that can increase. And the reason what they found was that the Neanderthals seem to have been the feral, wild version of Homo sapiens. So, right, if you look at, say, the wolf and compare it to, say, an Alsatian or something, they're similar, but they're not the same, right? There's noticeable differences, right? And they found in most species where you have a tame version and a wild version, right, you'll notice that there's significant differences in how they look. And they found that these genetic differences between us and Neanderthals are in those same genes, right? So what we have is we are like the tame version, right? And they're the wild version. And they lived out in small groups, out in the wilderness. They weren't as social as us. They didn't head towards civilization in the way that we have, in intense groups and collaboration. And that actually expresses in the DNA. So they started to become more ape-like. So it's kind of weird that people say the way you think is what you become. Mm-hmm. And in this case, it's actually our DNA is that weird and that clever that it actually does start to change you towards the environment that you're in. And in fairly fast speeds. I mean, we've seen it I think they tested it in foxes, where there was a project to see, how quick this can happen. They found that features that arise from taming can happen quite quickly. So it's a bit deceptive when you look at those differences, right? It actually takes 1 million years for two human populations to diverge enough that they can't interbreed, right? And so although there were some problems in interbreeding between Neanderthals and us, and they know that the male offspring seem to have not survived or have had problems. There was very few, because when they trace the DNA, it seems it's the Y chromosome's kind of missing. Mm-hmm. So they had become separate enough that there was interbreeding problems, right? But they are still, I would put them as a subspecies of the Homo sapiens family, that we could breed with them. We did with all the other ones as well, the Denisovans, and now there's 3 kinds of Denisovans. That's come up now. I mean, really, that name's going to become kind of meaningless, because those Denisovan groups were separated by, one of them was separated by like 400,000 years, right? Another one like 300, another one was like 200, right? So that's really, really separate, to say these are the same people. So we've got all these different kinds of humans, right, that are all mixing. So they're all within that 1 million years. And again, we're going to tackle why that is, because my focus is on events within that 1 million years. There hasn't been long enough for us to split enough that we can't mix, put it that way.
Yeah, and it keeps coming back to this same issue that we have, which is apparently 150,000 years ago, 200,000 years ago at the farthest, no matter what, we just appeared. And I don't see it as luck. Right? I don't see it as lightning strikes or something that magically changed DNA. So suddenly we have, no hair and a perfect forehead. You know what I mean? I that part I have an issue with, and there isn't a whole lot there to explain except for it just is. Now, how do we start to tackle, it's a very complex issue that we have. How do we start to tackle the magic of us just appearing?
Well, I can give you a bit of a timeline there. I can say it does go back further than that. Yes, it's true that the humans that look like, the Homo sapiens that look like us, they do tend, when we look at the fossil record, they arise around about 200,000 years ago, right? Again, fully modern humans, about 70,000. But if you take it back, there's a couple other really important points in this timeline. Now, I'll start at the beginning because that's it's kind of easy, I guess, for people. If you go back to the split with other primates, right, that's calculated at around about 6 million years ago, right? So if we're going with at least with the official timeline, they'll say, look, 6 million years ago, we've split away from any other primates. We've gone down our own path, right? And there's a load of genetic differences between us, all the other primates from that point onwards, at least. Okay, right. So back then, we're still talking about a kind of an ape man to some degree. They're not quite like us. They haven't got the big brain, right? They haven't got the size. These are small. They've got chimp-sized brains. They're much as they're different to the other, primates or whatever, we wouldn't recognize them as like, hey buddy, I'll buy you a beer, or these are some pretty weird characters. But then if we go along to about 2 million years ago, this is when things start to get interesting, because it's at that point that the brain seems to go into a fairly rapid expansion, and we have what's called Homo erectus. Homo erectus looks more or less like us, but you'd still notice that this is, this guy couldn't get on the bus and just sit next to you and you'd be okay with it, but you would recognize that, hey, this is some kind of human. This is not, not a chimp or something. And I believe there's engineering at that point, although that's not the focus of my book. I will say that, I believe that 2 million years ago, we have engineering of these other, early primates, if you like, or these hominins, right? So there's an upgrade. The brain is starting to get bigger. They know there's some genes that have changed. There's some really important genes that go through duplications and mutations, at that point. But it's still not us. So the next important point is, so you go from there. So you've got Homo erectus. They kind of mill around the world. They're going everywhere. You've got Homo erectus all the way down in Southeast Asia. They found them up in the Georgian Caucasus, dating back to about 1.8 million. Indonesia 1.7 million. So they're really ranging around the globe, these guys. But they don't do a lot with tools. They're not really advanced. They're certainly not building any airplanes or anything. And they don't really change much for about 1 million years. They're kind of stuck in a rut. But then we get to this really interesting point, which is around about 780,000 years ago. And obviously there's a reason why my book says sort of 800,000 years on the cover. Because at this point we get some major, major changes. And this is a total split away from the earlier hominins. There's changes to the brain. There's a chromosome 2 fusion. There's new genes appear. It's so radical, the change, that for all intents and purposes, a new species appears, right, out of nowhere. At the genetic level, this is a new species that appears out of nowhere. And then from 800,000 years, you see a rapid expansion in brain size. And you can see this on the charts. Anyone Googles, look at a chart for brain size expansion, you'll see that it goes like, wow, just straight up almost. And that goes all the way up to 200,000. That's pretty much when the brain expansion, this rapid expansion, it stops around about 200,000 years ago. It's almost like, experiment completing,
Right. And let me jump in right there, Bruce. We need to take a break right here.
Sure.
We'll pick up right where we are leaving off. Our guest tonight is Bruce Fenton. We're talking about us. The origins of us and human hybrids, hybrid humans, all of that. This is Faded Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. More with Bruce after this short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. What is cracking, everybody? Tonight, Bruce R. Fenton is here. We're talking about us, our human origins. How did we get here? Maybe we are all going to learn something together tonight with Bruce. Okay, Bruce. Okay. Let's get something very direct here. You set the stage, right? Brain development, 200,000 years, boom, things stopped and started at that point, right? Okay. The grand experiment had ended. I love the way that you put that. But let's get something clear here. Primates. Now, you have stated primates throughout the layout. Okay, when we are talking about 6 million years ago, 2 million years ago, are we talking about primates?
They come under the primate family, but hominins, which are technically humans of various sorts, arise around about 4 million years ago in the classical models, right? Round about sort of 4 or 5 million years ago. But they were still underneath the primate family. We're all in the greater primate family, right? Even as modern humans, we would be placed in that. Now, look, I've got some issues with that. Not the usual issues. I know a lot of people just say, look, I don't think we're primates. But my argument would be that I think the changes that were done were so dramatic at 780,000 years ago that we are a really different species to any of the other primates, okay? But yeah, before that, yeah, sure, these are variants within the primate family, but they are considered to be hominins, so they would be kinds of humans.
But so let's talk chromosomes then. Let's talk about pairs.
Yeah, things get really weird.
They do. And I love the black and white part of this, right? And when it just comes down to numbers and what the science says, that it gets really interesting. Let's talk about chromosomes and pairs. And so the audience understands exactly what we are talking about here, because there is a clear line in the sand, right? A very clear one. How many chromosome pairs do you have?
Yeah, we have 46 chromosomes, but it was once 48, right? All primates that are alive today, and as far as science knows, most of the extinct hominins, certainly the really archaic hominins, right? So we've got the whole list of Homo habilis, all of these guys. They had the 48 from what we understand, right? And that we have the 46. Now, this is a really dramatic change, and I'll tell you why. Because there's people out there who say, like, hey, like scientists will say to you, hey, but look, chromosome fusions happen. We can see with horses today, the wild horses and tame horses have a different number of chromosomes, right? Okay, yeah, it does happen. You can have two populations. Now, but look at that. For a start, you've got humans involved, right? That we're taming them, that we've isolated them. We were involved. It wasn't totally natural that there's these two populations. So I'd throw that in there as well.
Bingo.
So, right. So then, but if you look at us, usually when there's a chromosome issue, whether that's additional chromosomes or not the right number, lower chromosomes, usually there's a problem for a start. It's not usually a good thing, right? Something's gone wrong, and most of the time that won't be passed on, that you won't be able to reproduce. Sometimes you won't even survive. It can be really serious. So it's strange to think, first of all, it's implicitly strange that it was beneficial, that that we all have it, right? And this is something that the scientists kind of recognize, that this is strange, because, obviously I went into the papers on this, because it's an important part of my work. And what they say is, look, for this to have happened, for it to have gone from being, one or two people with a mutation to being everybody, you have to have two conditions. The first one is it should happen in a small isolated population somewhere, so you're not mixing with lots of other people that have the correct number of chromosomes. Otherwise it will just disappear again, right? So that was their first issue. They thought, well, it has to be a small isolated population. Bear in mind, a test group in an experiment is implicitly a small isolated population, right? And then the second thing you have is they said, well, also for it to become so dominant and so persistent, it must be giving extreme benefits, something so incredible that everyone inherits it, has a better survival chance than anyone else, right? So you've got two factors. So you've got a supposedly random error, right, that's given us this amazing upgrade, and then it has to have happened in a small isolated group like you'd have in an experiment. Isn't that a funny coincidence, right? And the dating is the thing that really matters, because for a long time this hadn't been well dated, right? And there was an assumption, certainly in our circles, like the fringe circles, the people that tackled this, assumed that must have happened about 200,000 years ago, because that's when the recognizable Homo sapiens was. But it turns out it's not. It goes all the way back to 780,000 years ago, which is this date I tackle, right? There's a geneticist who looked into, he wanted to get an accurate dating. So he knew that the fusion happened sometime after this split with the other primates. They knew that it's only us that had it, but they didn't know when after, whether it was 5 million years ago, 4, 3, 2, 1. But they did realize that Neanderthals have it, Denisovans have it. Okay, so that means that it has to have occurred before we diverged from them, and it has to have happened long after we've separated from any other primates, right? Somewhere in the middle. This guy looked at it, he said, well, hang on a minute. Look, we know the rate of change at the end of chromosomes, and we know that the changes occur faster than in the middle of chromosomes, right? So because the way they split. So when they fused, that has slowed down the rate of change and the rate of mutation in the middle of that chromosome, right? So he looked at it from a chemical perspective, and he was able to date it. He said that it has to have happened roughly 750,000 years ago, approximately, but it has to have happened before the split with the Denisovans and Neanderthals. And we now know that split has been dated, right, redated to around 750 to 800,000 years ago. And that's just in the last 2 years. Before that, people thought it was, the scientists believed it was around 400 to 500,000 years. That's been totally pushed back now because the new DNA they found in the Simila Huesos fossils in Spain, which is the oldest human DNA ever recovered. We now know that the split was way earlier. It goes back to this date again, 780,000 years ago. So what the heck is going on at this time? And that's where, my book really does a deep dive, because there's a lot more than just the fusion. I can tell you that there's a lot.
Okay, so if we take a look at this 800,000 year ago date, mm-hmm. And if we are looking at Spain, what does that do with Africa? And also, how could because I want to connect the dots to a couple of other points here, but how is it possible? Are we suggesting now that it was Spain where the spread of this change started from? Was it centralized out of Spain? Did it come out of Siberia, or are we taking Africa off of the list?
No, what they actually are was because the remains in Spain are about 500 and something thousand years old, right? So they don't go all the way back to that date. But when they do the analysis of the genome, they can date when a mutation happens, or they can date when there was an interbreeding event, that kind of stuff. So what they actually did was dated these changes. But that fossil itself is not right at the beginning. So it doesn't make Spain automatically the start. So instead, in my argument, like I say, for a number of reasons, I say that this is happening down in Southeast Asia and Australia, particularly Australia. And it's good that you were saying earlier that Australia is one of your favorite places, because I think you're going to love it even more by the end of this, because I argue that Homo sapiens and this lineage that goes back to 780,000 years ago begins in Australia, and that we can, for Homo sapiens, you can forget Africa. The hominins that have wandered around the world, yeah, maybe some of them evolved there. Maybe some of them evolved in Europe. There's a new article came out tonight actually saying that there's a jawbone that they believe indicates that Southern Europe, about 8 million years ago, had the first hominins, right? So there's all sorts of things going on at the moment that are changing things. But for this particular matter, we get taken all the way down to Australia. Australia
proper?
Yep. Also in the Indonesian islands, that's also very much involved. And again, you've been seeing probably in the news recently, I know certainly you would have seen this, and listeners maybe as well. The Philippines is being talked about. They've just found a new kind of human there.
Yep.
They've also realized that the Denisovans were living on islands in Indonesia and also on Papua New Guinea, which was part of Australia. If you look at the maps, when you go back, wind back the clock, there was no sea between Australia and Papua New Guinea, right? That was a singular landmass of what they called Sahul. In my book, which I published in April 2017, I explained that this was the homeland of the Denisovans. Of course, nobody wanted to listen to that. No. The Denisovans lived in Siberia, mm-hmm, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, but because I'd already dug through the papers, and I could see where these anomalies were going, right? So in the book, I explained that, no, this is their homeland. And now, in the last few weeks, it's come out that we've got at least 3 lines of Denisovan DNA in Papuans, right? And nowhere else. Why is that then? It's because they lived there. That was their home, right? And so my model is being incrementally proved. So this isn't just like, wild stuff. Like, what do you mean they're in Australia? You know, it's like, hang on a minute. The academics are now being forced to relook and say, well, how can it be that the Papuans are the only people with all these lines of ancient DNA? You know, this doesn't make sense. We thought that these guys were isolated and only arrived there like 50 or 60,000 years ago. And now we're finding they've got lineages of 400,000-year-old Denisova lineages, you know, diverged away from everyone else all that time ago. Where have they been all that time? Right? The only way you can be that isolated is if you're over water somewhere, because humans they mate, right? So to have that deep split, 400,000 years without them encountering anyone else, they've got to be either on an island somewhere or on an isolated landmass. And we know that Australia and the Indonesian islands are the only places really that were that isolated in ancient times. So the model is crashing towards my argument. And one of the things we also know is that there's tools, stone tools, on islands in Indonesia, like at Flores, for example, which go back 1 million years. There's also these Homo floresiensis fossils. And these are the Hobbit people that guys would have read about.
Right.
Right. They go back 900,000 years or so on Flores. Right. So if you reach Flores, it means you've already crossed what's called the Wallace's line, which is the border between Asia and Australia in terms of flora and fauna. Right. It's argued that large mammals and stuff couldn't cross. And that's why you have all the marsupials and stuff in Australia, you know, mammals up in Asia, right? But these finds are on the east side of the Wallace's line. And they say, like, if you cross that, there's no reason why you can't reach Australia. So I'm thinking, if you've done that 1 million years ago, are we really supposed to believe, Jimmy, that it took them another 900,000 years just to sail across to Australia? Does that make any sense, right? They've done all this journeying, right, supposedly across of Eurasia. They've managed to get into the islands of Indonesia, and they don't hit the enormous continent, just, you know, another like 100K ahead of them. Like, it's not believable. And that was one of the bases in my book. I say, look, you know, once they're there, within, let's even say 50,000, 100,000 years, you know, I'm generous. I'll give them, they can be stuck there for 100,000 years. I don't care for my model. It doesn't matter, because it only takes them to have crossed that once in that period for them to have reached Australia. And we now have an isolated hominin population on Australia, but at a really important time, because obviously we're going to come to this in a bit, but a time when there's an arrival of beings who are not like us, you know, they're not from around here, and they happen to end up in Australia. And that's why we cross into some of the stranger stuff. But yeah, it all begins in Australia. And the Aboriginal people have always said, you know what they've always said? We were the first. We've always been here, and everyone else came from us. And that's their law, right?
Right.
And you know, and people have said, oh, you know, that's just them making it up. And it's not. I can validate it's not.
Well, let's stay right here. I do want to point out that when the press release came out about the cave in the Philippines, that new species was only 3 to 3.5 feet tall, fully grown adult.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Shorter than the Hobbit species that made the news a couple of years ago. And I found that very, very interesting that they found, I believe they found stone tools. They found tools in that cave. They found other artifacts to suggest an advancing species of human that was there. But when I got to the 3.5 foot tall part, now I have to visualize what's going on. What did you make of that when you read it?
Yeah, look, I think that what we have, and again, this ties in a bit with the Homo naledi find in Africa as well. If people know that there's these little humans that were found in a cave down in South Africa, which didn't make sense at all, because again, those fossils turned out to be about 200,000 years old. Mm-hmm. And when they first found them, they thought they were like 2 million years old, because they're tiny with small brains. You know, they still have the curved fingers for like swinging in trees and stuff. And they're finding similar features on these, you know, on these new species in the Philippines, right? And that's because I firmly believe that what we have there are residual populations of what humans would have been like, right, if they hadn't been modified, that they would still be almost chimp-like creatures, right? And so you have these little isolated populations that didn't fully get the upgrade, and they didn't meet us a lot. There wasn't much inbreeding, right? So you find that they have some features, they said, of modern humans, suggesting that there probably was encounters, there probably was limited interbreeding. So they've picked up a few modern traits, but they weren't really, you know, on the main road, right? Because they're off on some little island somewhere, right? So we've retained. They're finding this bizarre. Obviously, the mainstream are like baffled. Like, how can this be? Look at what humans are like. We're supposed to be all evolving towards, this wonderful big-brained form, but it isn't working out like that because they're finding these populations, these isolated populations, and they're nothing like us. They're these tiny hobbit creatures with little brains that were still swinging in trees. Yeah. So something's not adding up because they're nearby. You've got totally modern humans, right? So how can we all be on the same evolutionary path? Like, how can it be that we're all sharing the same, natural mutations? You see what I mean, Jimmy? It doesn't stack up, innit? If the next island along, you've got like little monkey people.
Well, what does this do with, Zechariah Sitchin and the Sumerian tablets and that history? If you can call it mythology, whatever we want to do with that story, that suggested a timeline going back 400,000 years. You're pushing it back to 800,000 years. What would have occurred 800,000 years ago to cause the change in genetics?
Sure. I mean, without going into a sort of disparaging of Sitchin too much, I will just say that as far as I know, to the best of my knowledge, he never did apply any genetic sciences to his model, right? Because there's an article that was written not long before he passed away, and he was pushing for some genetic studies to be done of, I think it's a 4,500-year-old princess in Sumeria. As far as I know, that was the only real, attempt by him to get involved with genetics. So you've got to keep that in mind, for people say, okay, that, how do you really prove something like that? If you say humans were made 400,000 years ago, I'd like some genetic data, right? Because otherwise, what are you really going on apart from a guess? Yeah. So the difference here is I'm not just guessing, right? I went into the genetic papers. I went into the genetic studies, right? But also I have something else that he doesn't have, which is, and this is where it gets more weird, is I have craft debris from the craft that actually brought the engineers. I have a whole narrative of what happened to them, why this happened, dating of craft material. I have dating of the genetic engineering. There's a whole lot, and that's what I'll cover now. Because now you've sort of brought that up, I can explain how that's come about.
Hold on a minute here, Bruce. Hold on a minute. What did you just say?
I have craft debris. I mean, I have in my house debris from the craft that brought the engineers here. I've identified it. This material has been tested, not by me, by leading academics. There's a 100-year-long mystery about this material because they can't place it. It doesn't fit. And on top of that, it fits perfectly with information that came into my hands by some slightly strange means. I know what this material is. I know what it is. It dates exactly to when it should do with these modifications, right? I have the dating of these genetic changes like chromosome 2 and other changes, really anomalous changes.
You're talking about the mutation of 2.
That and other things, right? Genes, for example, there's brain genes. There's a brain gene, right, that appears. It's really important for the neocortex. The neocortex is the folds on the brain that we have, which gives us increased surface area for more processing, right? It's really important. And there's one of the genes, they describe it in the paper. And this is the thing, I think there's a lot of scientists who know that something's up. So when you look at the way they describe things sometimes, you can read between the lines, because there's a paper and they say this gene seems to be almost as though someone's cut a fragment out of a longer gene, Xeroxed it, and put it back in. When a scientist starts talking in those terms, Jimmy, aren't you thinking, this doesn't sound right? They're talking about cutting genes and Xeroxing them and putting them back in.
Well, that's exactly it, isn't it? And Bruce, I don't want to want anybody to be confused as to what you just said.
Yeah, I'll rewind it a bit.
Yeah, you said we're going to head to a break in 2 minutes.
Yep.
So let's establish so we can pick this up when we come back. You said craft in reference to something off-world carried scientists here, and
absolutely.
that you have the debris from this craft in your possession.
Definitively.
Definitively. That
where I would sit with any scientist happily, right? I reach out to people, they don't want to talk to me, but I will happily debate with any scientist about it. I'm confident that I have craft debris and I have accurate dating of the genetic changes at the same date as the debris.
At 800,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm. So I even more specific, 780.
700.
I can be that specific with it.
Do you have a month and a day of the week?
I'm working on it.
You're working on it?
I'm working on it.
Okay, because...
Yeah, that's as close as I'm going to get, 780.
You know that Twitter's freaking out right now in the chat rooms, okay? This is strong stuff. So when we come back, let's get very specific. I don't care where it came from or who gave it to you, but we'll get specific as to what this is and how you were able to tie all of this together.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's key. Yeah.
Fascinating. Let's take a break right here. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Our guest tonight, Bruce R. Fenton. We are talking about us, our origins, and of course, human hybrids. Or is it hybrid humans? You can follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. You can also follow Bruce at Hybrid Humans 144 right there on Twitter. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back, Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, Bruce R. Fenton is here. Man. Okay, we got to pick up right where we left off on that blockbuster right before the break. Bruce, okay, all right. Let's start to digest what you just dropped on us. I want to talk. Obviously, I got to talk about this debris. Where were the debris origins? Are we suggesting Australia?
Yes. And there's quite a bit of it. We're talking about a very large craft, right? I'll just quickly tell you why I was even looking for it, because that fills in a big blank for people. When I was involved with I was involved with research into a site in Ecuador. I was living in Ecuador, and I don't know if some of your listeners may know what's called the Lost City of Giants in Ecuador. It was covered in mainstream media, all over the place, and all the alternative media. There was a megalithic site out in the jungle. Right? I was basically the only sort of international researcher that was involved. There were some local Ecuadorians that had found the place. This site tied into a lost culture, right, of Aboriginal type people that lived in the Americas 50,000 years ago. Right. So
right.
First drop that in there, because that in itself is bizarre, right? That's what led me into looking at, hey, what's going on here in this human origin story? This doesn't make sense. You've got Aboriginal people, right, at sites in the jungle 50,000 years ago. And I started looking into the whole human origin story. That took me to a connection with a couple of guys called Stephen and Evan Strong, right? They're researchers in Australia. They deal with this problem with, how did these Aboriginal people end up elsewhere? And that's kind of where I got involved in that. But they connected me with someone else, and this is where it got really important. This is a lady called Valerie Barrow. She has a book called Alturinga, When the First Ancestors Were Created, published in 2002, about some experiences she had in 1995. She encountered an artifact. A lady came to her house with an artifact, said, I feel that, you're meant to look after this because your house is called Alturinga. And Alturinga is an Aboriginal word meaning the dream time. The object that she had with her is called a Chiringa stone. And they're considered by there's a couple of different tribes in Australia who consider these to be objects that go back to the dream time when human beings were created, and that they contain the consciousness of entities that were present at that time, and that they can pass on information to people. Now, you'd think at first, okay, what wacky magic stones, and all this stuff. But that's obviously what you think at first. But the weird thing is, when you start looking a bit more into this, I think that what the Aboriginal people have is something called a Bracewell probe. Now, if people can go away later and look at this, that it's theorized by a number of leading, scientists in space sciences, that advanced civilizations will send out probes, as part of their own SETI, if you like. They will send out these little probes. They'll go off to planets where they think there's going to be some chance of life or civilizations. And those things can lie dormant like sentinels that will monitor the planet. And that when they detect something, they can send back information, and that they will have on board their own artificial intelligence. And one of the things about Bracewell probes that excites scientists is they say, well, there's the possibility that they could be programmed to make contact, and that when they do, they can actually communicate directly with us. This is exactly what happens, right? This lady encounters this object within a couple of days of deciding, yes, I'll look after it. And this other lady who had it was ill, was trying to get it back to the Aboriginal people because she is considered sacred, right? She leaves it with her. And within a couple of days, she starts having a voice talking right directly into her head, like a kind of telepathic, transfer. You can call it download, whatever people want to call it. Obviously, we now know there's voice-to-skull technologies, right, that are being used by even scientists now. So think about that next generation, right? So this thing is talking in her head, and it tells her, look, I'm a consciousness of a star person, of an extraterrestrial, from a civilization that has visited this planet in the remote past. I've influenced the minds of people to come to your house because I want to reveal to you this lost history. It calculates for whatever reason that she's going to be able to get this information out. Consider that I now have this information and we're talking to you. So this artificial intelligence knows what the hell it's doing, right? It gives her this whole long story of how basically this craft, an enormous craft, like a kilometer across craft, and it's not metal, right? It's a crystalline craft. It's grown in a crystal matrix. It has a living AI consciousness, carries 50,000 beings, assorted beings from an alliance that comes to this planet. Now, first of all, that's going to start sounding a bit wacky. You think crystal ships, woo, what's that about? Is this some sort of new age thing? But when you start looking at what the leading minds, in the AI field and in space sciences, when they start to theorize about aliens, they quickly go to post-biological entities, right? And when you look at their description, they say, what we expect is not to encounter biological beings, right? But to encounter silicon entities, right?
Sure.
With AI.
Yes.
Yeah. That's where the science goes, yeah? Very quickly. So now if you think about it, right, they've got this, they're saying that this being is describing their craft was a giant living silica network. Right, and it makes a heck of a lot of sense. Instead of putting a little computer, a little crappy computer on your ship, the ship is the computer. The whole thing is processing power, right? It's a living ship. It arrives here, but there is a problem. Now, it's arrived with a specific mission. It's a colony ship, but there is an agreement with another party who is already here on the planet. This planet is occupied, right, by another group, and they're not very friendly. But they have an agreement. There's going to be a transfer. There's going to be a handover of Earth to this alliance. Now, this doesn't quite work out. It describes there's a betrayal. The ship is destroyed in space. It melts. It's hit with what they call electromagnetic resonance weaponry. It basically vibrates the molecules of the ship apart and melts in space. There's a description that fragments rain down. Right? A few survivors manage to leave the mothership in smaller craft, and they make their way down to the surface, landing at a place called Gosford, which is known today for the Gosford glyphs, controversial, seemingly Egyptian glyphs, right in Australia.
Right.
So that some people will know as well. Now, okay, I'm the kind of person who doesn't like to just swallow all that. I mean, yeah, it can be true, but hey, where's the proof, right? So there's also, it says it's towards 900,000 years ago, roughly, they're saying. And then in another date I've seen her saying somewhere between 700 to 900, right? So I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to look, firstly, I want to look in the geological record. I want to see if there's anything like that, because I know metal won't last, right? So if you've got a metal ship, I don't think there's any chance of finding it hundreds of thousands of years later. But silica is different. Silica materials can last for hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of years, right? So I'm looking like, okay, is there going to be anything like this? And I couldn't believe it, because there's a bit of you still thinking, hundreds of thousands of years ago, even if this is real, am I going to find anything like this? And it turns out there's a 100-year-long mystery in science about this material in Australia they call australite buttons, australite tektite buttons, right? And the reason why they're a mystery is because the only way they look a bit like a button, but what's actually happened is they say that an object exploded in space, It melted instantly, turned into liquid. The liquid formed spheres, which only happens in a vacuum with liquids, right? It turns to sphere.
That's
and
right.
they froze instantly. So where's that going to be? It's got to be space, the cold of space, right? And so they look at the shaping, and they say that then it looks like that these balls moved in a horizontal plane of the Earth. Like, so in other words, a decaying orbit, not coming straight down, but in an orbit coming slowly down, allowed them to gradually melt, and they formed these shield shapes at the front. So you get the front part of the sphere melts, goes backwards, forms these buttons, right? So in the whole geological record of the planet, these occur once. Right, in 4.5 billion years, they occur once, and they're dated at 780,000 years. Now, geologists, they've thrown everything at this. They've said, well, it must be an asteroid or a comet that's hit the planet, right? And it's hit and it's thrown the debris back into space, and then it's rained down again. That is their best argument. Okay, bear this in mind. Now, that doesn't work, and there's a number of reasons why. Firstly, there's no crater. Yeah.
How big are these parabolic buttons? How big are they?
Only a few centimeters across.
Okay.
They're not very big.
Okay.
Right.
Got it.
And so what they found is that they said, well, okay, we expect the crater to be, I should add here, right? This type of material is spread from Antarctica all the way up to Laos and China, right? It covers, in fact, you can find small pieces, microtectites from this, covering, I think they've calculated about a quarter of the world's surface, right? So this is, can you imagine an impact that would throw debris around a quarter of the world's surface? It's very unlikely for a start. But on top of that, they said, well, there should be an enormous crater, because they've calculated the object must be about a 1 kilometer diameter across, right? So they're looking for this massive crater, and they know that the debris field ends in sort of Laos, southern China, and there is no sign, right, of this crater. There's chunks of material there that weigh 20 kilos, right? How far does a 20 kilo chunk go? Not far, right? So if you've got that has to be the impact site if there was an impact, right? There's nothing there. Then they looked again, they thought, well, also you've got a problem, they said, because these are NASA studies, right, as well. The NASA studies say, well, look, the only way that these things could have formed, again, is in space. So even if material was thrown up, it wouldn't be liquid by the time it got to space. It would have cooled down, going through the atmosphere, and it'd been solid. And so we wouldn't have these spheres. So they had to discount that. They've said, look, the only way this has happened is if an object has exploded. Now, the second thing is, right, these are 80% silica from melted quartz. Right, so you've got this object that is now 80% quartz, right? And they said it has to be in orbit around the planet. you think that, Jimmy? You got a giant crystal orbiting the planet, right? For a start, it's like a kilometer across. NASA's telling us it must have been in orbit, right? And then it explodes, right? For no comprehensible reason. It's not an asteroid. It doesn't have the same chemical composition as an asteroid. Can't be a comet. Comets just come straight slamming in, right? They don't start orbiting the planet, yeah? And then we've got, obviously, the what I expect, this high silica content from melted quartz, as this entity is saying, this is a crystalline ship. It has other elements in it, but it's largely crystalline. The dating, 780,000, right? So I've got this, I'm like, oh my God, right? This is perfect match. I know this is an orbiting object. I know it's crystalline, et cetera, right? The second thing is, in this same information, there's another really important anomalous event. It says that the survivors have landed, right? Some of them are dying. They can't really live here. They move on to plan B. They say they can't colonize. What they decide instead is to upgrade a hominin species that already lives here and essentially transfer their mission objectives onto these hominins. Now, not only do they think that that's beneficial to the hominins, but it is a self-interest as well, because these beings are capable of transferring their consciousness upon death, directing their incarnations, right, into these hominins. It's almost like creating a spacesuit for yourself, right? Some really weird stuff. But remember, we're dealing with very, very odd beings here. These are not your average guy, right? And then on top of that, we have another event. Because they say that 5 years later, a second mission arrives, and these are not colonists. This is a military detachment that is sent to enforce the original agreement. Warns the group that's already on the planet that's done this betrayal, tells them, get off the planet, or we're going to bombard you from space. Now, this second group, they say, look, most of them say, look, we don't want trouble. We're going to go. We shouldn't really have betrayed the agreement. And most of them go back to where they said from Orion. They go through the jump gate, they go, they leave. But not all of them. And at this point, this second group, who are, it's described as leonines, humanoid leonine-headed beings. That's how they're described, right? That they then pull in asteroids from space, and they say that we use these as our main weaponry. We don't just fire lasers or rockets. We can throw down objects so large we can split a planet open, right? But that's not the intention. They just want to hit these underground bases where these beings are, okay? Now, it sounds, again, wacky, oh, geez, this sounds a bit far out. And I'm thinking, well, if something like that really happened, surely there would be some evidence, this is something major, because they're saying they've bombarded the planet from multiple directions with asteroids. I mean, geez, I've never heard of that. So again, I go into the geological records, or I go into the papers. I'm looking for anything like that. Turns out that in 2016, a German geological team only goes and uncovers that Earth was hit by a multi-directional asteroid bombardment. And guess when? 780,000 years ago, right? And they found the impacts have hit Africa, Mexico, Tasmania, all over the place. And they're not asteroids from a singular swarm. They said the chemical compositions are different, as though someone's just pulling in asteroids, right, from the asteroid belt. This is not a swarm. And they're hitting the planet from different directions. So again, a swarm doesn't really do that. Yeah. And I'm thinking, hang on a minute, this is bizarre. You've got this object that's in orbit 708,000 years ago, right? You've got the second thing it said, the major thing, this bombardment 780,000 years ago. And keep in mind, Valerie's book is published 2002. She can't know about this study, yeah, because it doesn't come out till 2016.
Right.
Yeah, so it's important. And then the third thing, of course, is, well, what about this engineering of humans? Because then apparently, they're engineering humans. And as we touched on earlier, it now turns out that the chromosome fusion and a lot of other things that are going on, the sudden expansion of the brain, are all dating back to 780,000 years ago, exactly in line with the events that this entity in this object, this, I'll just call it a Bracewell probe, because it matches that description. This thing seems to have activated, it has made contact, it has transferred its recordings of the history of this planet, it is passing that on. It basically has given us the whole download, saying that, this is all stuff that now needs to be restored at this time to us. We need to know what actually happened. And with those three things, you then hit a point where, hang on a minute, each one of these are anomalies, right? Massive, massive anomalies. Now, to line up three anomalies in time like that, so major, and that they're coming from the prediction from an extraterrestrial, right? That's in this object, and it's telling us that, and keep in mind, right, the Aboriginal people who have these things, these Tringa stones, their lore, their mythology is that they contain the consciousness of the first creating beings, right? So there's a coherent, consistent story about these objects, right? And that they're scared of them, right? They don't like to be around them. They're kept in caves secretly. Occasionally, a shaman, a clever man, elder, will bring them out for ceremonial purposes. Other people don't want to touch them, right? They know that these things are powerful and can be a problem, okay? Right, and this is their own law. You can go in and look into Tringa stones. They'll see that they're not something anyone just goes and messes around with, right? So,
well, let me jump. Let me
jump in.
I want to ask you a quick question. Does any of this involve the FOXP2 gene?
Yeah, there's modifications on the FOXP2 gene at the beginning of the split between Denisovans, Neanderthals, and us. It's one of the genes that they have modified.
Yeah, seriously, because there is research that supports the FOXP2 gene in Denisovan, one, and two, about this time, about 800,000 years ago, speech, like real speech, talking, started to happen with the Denisovan and possibly other species on this planet. Is this all tied all the way back to Gosford?
It is tied to that. And I'll tell you something else that ties in. If you're following the work of Dr. Gary Nolan and Dr. Kit Green, what they're doing, one of the things they've been looking at is this caudate, this area of the brain, which they suspect is to do with intuition, right? The weird thing is, I was digging into some papers the other day because, I find their work quite fascinating because I'm obviously, people can guess by now, I'm a bit of a geek for this stuff. And so I'm looking at it, and I found that, funnily enough, this FOXP2 gene that's been modified, it also expresses itself in that area that they're looking at. So if you think about it, you've got this gene that not only is it giving us language abilities, it seems to be implicated in the same region, which is giving us intuition. So isn't that funny that you've got this modification that gives us not only, increased speech, but probably is giving us psychic abilities, right? In the same modification. Now that's pretty uncanny.
It is, and the timing too. If we're pushing this back to 800,000 years, that's where they're suggesting with Denisovan, and it all ties back into Gosford. Oh, I wanted to ask you. I want to stay on this. Why sure. Gosford?
Why did they come down there? I believe that the craft was in geostationary orbit above Antarctica when it was hit. And I think so when they came down to the nearest landmass, which was southern Australia. It just happened that that's the area of southern Australia they made it to, that they landed in. The description in Valerie's work, she had an event, right? She met with an Aboriginal elder who was a well-known, very respected elder, a famous healer, who turned up at her house with a friend of hers. They got talking. It comes out, about the object. He says it's men's business. You shouldn't have it here. They have a bit of a conversation. In the end, he's happy with the situation that she has it stored away in a box and isn't messing around with it. And he says, look, you need to go to Gosford. This is a really special place. We have law about this place that it's to do with this, this dream time. Takes her there. They go and have this exploration there of the glyphs and all these things. And then they walk up to the top of this large rock outcrop, which is at Gosford, where the glyphs are. And suddenly they have a time slip. And I'm sure, a lot of people out there will know about time slips, that they happen. Sometimes people suddenly find themselves, no longer in the time that they're in. There's the famous case where a couple of women find themselves, I think it's in the French court, and suddenly there's Marie Antoinette or something that's there. And, it happens. People have these time slips.
Happens to me all the time, Bruce.
Yeah, okay. But they have this really weird one. The three of them realize that they are, although they're in the same place, they're not in the same time. The forest has changed. They look down to the beach below them, and there is a saucer craft crashed into the water. There's another saucer craft hovering above it, pulling beings out of the water. They look at themselves and they realize they are no longer human. They have elongated heads, they've got no hair, they're tall and spindly, and the three of them realize that they've slipped back to some past life where they are non-humans, and they are witnessing the aftermath of this event, and that the craft, have managed to get down, but at least one of them has been damaged on the way down, has crashed, and that there are beings on the beach injured, and they see the whole replay, right? This is early on in her work. She sort of has this experience. So she actually sees it. They also have a recall. Jerry, the guy this Aboriginal elder, he actually realizes as well that he says, this meshes with a dream that I've been having throughout my life, where I'm on this large white ship and that suddenly the alarms start going and I have to take my family and rush to an escape craft. He said, I've had this dream all my life. Now I understand. This is the other part of it where I come down and I crash, and he realizes he died in the water. So it's really full on, this stuff. And at this point, Al Chiringa, this being in this object, tells Valerie, look, you're going to encounter quite a lot of people that have memories of this event, right? And in the coming sort of months, she ends up meeting about 30 different people, right? Who each one of them has some memories of this event. Yeah, it starts coming up. Like one person, she's in a car park, and someone comes up to her and says, I've got to talk to you, sits in her car, goes into a trance, right, and starts telling her, I remember being on the ship. It's that weird. When weird comes into your life, it gets super weird pretty fast, right? And like any experiencers and contactees know that. So basically she has that going on. She has the entity talking to her. She has a follow-up lot of weirdness coming from these people that are remembering the event, on top of it. And the two stories are coinciding. So she's getting their past life memories and they're matching with what this Al Chiringa is telling her as what's happened, right? So there's a whole really weird, full-on event going on around her. Yeah. I can't say I'm going to go for all of it, prove it. No, I've chosen the key points, right? Because, obviously there's little details where some things don't last 780,000 years. So that's why I've picked, obviously, the craft, the bombardment, and the genetic engineering, because those were the three things I thought, well, there's some hope of actually testing those and coming back with some reasonable science where I can argue my case. Because look, I wouldn't be on here talking about it. If I didn't feel confident that this was solid, I wouldn't put myself out there for it just to people to laugh about it. You know what I mean? Yeah, sure.
And I want to get to a couple of specifics here about this debris. Mm-hmm. Sure. Because you indicated, and which I understand, just for clarification, for transparency, that it was a crash, sort of, in that there were escape craft that ascended down to Earth, right? Yeah. Okay, so the debris that you have Is it from the disintegrated craft that was orbiting Earth, or is it from one of the craft that came down?
It's from the larger craft. What happened is this object, once the large craft was hit with these weapons and it disintegrated, obviously it wasn't all of it liquefied, but there was quite a lot of it that was melted to liquid, right, to this liquid crystal, which then causes these balls. But there's other larger chunks. And so if you imagine for a moment, you've got a decaying orbit and it's coming down from Antarctica and it's coming in towards the Earth's upper atmosphere, right? The first wave of debris is this molten glass, which has become these spheres, these little balls. They're rolling out and they're having to enter the atmosphere and then they're melting as they go in. But the larger pieces, right, they break through the atmosphere. And so that would be around about Central Australia. So after that, you have a different type of debris, right? These larger pieces come in and they cause air bursts. Because obviously when they build up so much energy, there's a point as they pass through the atmosphere, they explode.
They explode,
right? Yeah, so these throw out showers of australite in a second form, which is, it's called, well, there's dumbbells, teardrop shapes, and cores, which they don't look like these buttons, but they're different. And the reason for that is because, they've already breached the atmosphere in a larger piece, then they explode. So they don't get these signature button shapes, right? And that debris field goes on all the way across to Southeast Asia. You can find them in the Philippines, in Laos, southern China, and that's the end of the field. Then you have a type called muongnong tektite, and that is layered, strange layers of this material, which again are mysterious. Nobody really knows how those formed, they're very bizarre. But that's where you've got these 20-kilo chunks and stuff. So we know the whole angular path of this decaying orbit. It basically is from Antarctica down to sort of southern China. And you can kind of picture in your mind, that obviously there's a point where it breaches the atmosphere, you no longer get these small pieces coming down from space. And that's why we can see the debris field change, right? And it matches exactly with expectations. And the reason why it covers so much of the planet, a third of the planet or something with this material, is because it's raining down in an explosion from space. So this material is getting shot off everywhere, right? It's not coming down in like how an asteroid would come down in a singular path, right? They usually, you don't have a small area affected by an asteroid, because obviously they're very omnidirectional and they just hit in one place, and even if a few bits come off, they'll be within, say a few hundred kilometers. Right, this is a third of the planet's surface. It's because something's exploding out in all directions. It's being hit with weaponry, right? And so the pieces are going everywhere. They're raining down, for thousands of miles out of this path. You've got lots of debris that's been blown out by the forces of the explosion, right? So exactly meshing with our expectations of an object that's been hit with weaponry is how we see the debris field. And that's why it's such an enormous debris field. And because the craft's so big, the chunks that are coming in, some of these are still quite large when they form these aerial bursts. So we have quite a lot of material that comes down across Southeast Asia. There's nothing else in the record of the planet at all like this. I mean, there's tektite, but they form much smaller fields than this. And there's only 4 strewn fields of tektite. So, tektite itself is kind of implicitly weird, but only the australite tektite has that button form, and it's the only one that is spread so far.
Let's take a break right here. Fascinating conversation. This is Fade to Black. Our guest tonight, Bruce R. Fenton. We are talking about the origins of us. Amazing. I can't wait to get back after this short break. You can follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. You can follow Bruce at HybridHumans144 on Twitter. We'll be right back.
Hi, everybody. This is Rob Halford, the Metal God, on JimmyChurchRadio.com.
Welcome back. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Fascinating conversation tonight. Bruce R. Fenton is here. We're talking about the origins of us. 800,000 years ago, it appears that it went down right there in Australia. Bruce, we've clearly established that. And what I want to, we've got one segment left, to talk about the hybrid human hybrid side of this and the changes that occurred. So, when I want to go back to Sitchin for just a second in the discussion of, because I want to talk about where these species came from off planet. Obviously the conversation is always about Nibiru and the Anunnaki and them doing a snip to our DNA and establishing those changes. Could the Sumerian tablets, if they are what they are, could they have suggested the very same thing? It just happened at another place in another time, and the timeline is off somewhat, and so forth. And where did these ships come from? Were they from Nibiru, if you know what I mean?
I think that if people look really closely at what the Sumerians and other Mesopotamian civilizations say, and not just them, but look around the world, look at the Egyptians, look at the Mayans, look at everyone. They all focus on a couple of star systems, right? Orion and the Pleiades. Mm-hmm. That's universal. You go anywhere, pretty much the same star systems keep coming up, right? And those come up in this narrative as well, because as we sort of touched on a bit there, the beings that were on Earth that weren't very friendly, right? They go back to Orion, funnily enough. The other beings that have arrived here and done this, they've come from the Pleiades, right? But this is explained in a way which changes the narrative on the Pleiadians, right? Because they make it very clear, although this craft arrives from a stargate in the Pleiades, they are not from a homeworld there. And this is a mixture of beings. There's an alliance of beings who they pass through a stargate network. And the last point they go through before arriving here is the Pleiades. So it's not wrong for them to say, we have come from the Pleiades, right? But if you think about that, that doesn't mean they live there, right? And in fact, the Pleiades is a really young star cloud, yeah? There should be no worlds with life on them in the Pleiades, right? We know it's really young. So, but what they do have there is a gateway, yeah? And so these beings, although they're referred to as Pleiadians, I think they need to rethink this, okay? They don't come from Maya or Mariopa or any of these stars there. And in fact, they go into some details here. I mean, there's beings that have joined this mission from all around the galaxy. And they look very different. You've got some with the elongated heads. You've got others that are just these gold-skinned beings. You've got crystalline entities that are housed in robotic suits. I mean, it is like as wacky as you can imagine. This is a whole collection of beings, right, that work together for a shared good. Now, how does this shared good come about? I'll tell you why. This alliance is really old, and it formed because of a war that had happened in the past. And this war was initiated by a group that they referred to as the Draco. And the Draco are some nasty, nasty entities, right? These things, they feed on consciousness itself, the consciousness of entities, right? And the way they say there's a war that plagued the galaxy before any of us humans existed, and that the Draco created life. They created reptilians and all sorts of tall greys and insectoids, all sorts of, they had their own creations. They're analogous to the fallen angels, if you want. There's some really nasty things. On the flip side, there's another group of non-physical intelligences that are called the Elohim. And the Elohim are consulted by the various races in this Pleiadian alliance. They consider them to be their advisors, in a non-physical form. The Draco War swept through the cosmos and caused many, many different worlds to band together, to fight back, and to push these entities basically into another dimension. I mean, it seems that they've now retreated into, they're not in our physical world, our physical universe anymore, right? Doesn't mean that they don't do anything or have interaction, and there's certainly some reason to be concerned that they might one day return. So this gets into some really, again, I'm not saying I can sit and prove to you that there's Draco, but this is part of what Al Turinga explains, that this is the reason why there's this alliance and why there's these strange beings all working together. There's a history to that they had a common good where they had to band together to do this. And the reptilians are the beings that were on Earth, right? These are the ones I've been hinting about, this underground bases and this handover. These reptilians, they've had the Earth for a long time, right? And one of the things that they have been doing is they've been supplying food for their Draco masters. And what they did is they engineered humans, the early hominins, as a slave race, who would serve not only as general workers, but also were offerings to their Draco gods, these entities, right? Really horrific kind of stuff going on. Now, there's a point where they have been told, look, you are to hand this planet back to Alliance control. This is the way it's going to go down because, this was an Alliance planet. You've taken it over. You're going to have to get the heck out of here. And that's basically the backstory to what is going on. And these reptilians have been on the planet playing with DNA. They've done all sorts of things, modifying dinosaurs, making animals. And that's why if you look back in the record, there's other points where there's been genetic engineering. I'm going to sort of, go too far, but there's a recent paper, and some people would have seen this, where 30 scientists banded together saying that the Cambrian explosion was a panspermia event. And they even go as far as saying they think octopus may be from outer space because they have such strange characteristics. They can change their skin color, they can change their shape, they have intelligence, they have a different eye structure to all the other animals. Right? This paper is as near as scientists will get to saying, we think aliens came here. Aliens came and delivered animals. But they say maybe a comet brought these animals here, right? Do you think it's likely a comet is going to bring living animals here or a spaceship, right?
Well, I do know this. I'll never eat octopus or anything like that ever again.
No, it puts me off as well. And these guys, 30 guys, 30 academics, they've done the science. And if you have a look at their paper, and you can Google it, octopus from outer space.
I did.
Yeah, it's there. And you'll see they go into a lot of detail, and they show that it's not. They find that not only octopus, but many other animals. And this is what we touched on in the beginning. There's many other animals that seem to appear in the fossil record without any precursors, almost as if they're either delivered here or, what's the other alternative? Someone here is making them. They're just making these things. They're tweaking things with their genomes, and they're creating new species. And that's exactly what's happening. And the first hominins, the first in our line, we do go out to primates, but we didn't naturally evolve from them. They just modify things. When they wanted to change them, they just change them. And that's why you suddenly get Homo erectus. It has a number of gene changes that are different to earlier hominins, right? You go back to the chimps and all that, their ancestors. We suddenly diverge from them because there's people here, there's beings here that can just do a bit of modification on the genome. You get a new species. Now, 780,000 years ago, there's something different happens. And that's because we have beings that are not just monsters, that have arrived here and that are put in a position where it suits their needs and the greater good to start upgrading us, right? And to make us into something that is more like part of their alliance, and less like slaves of these enemy forces, right? So it definitely becomes a complex exopolitical narrative, without doubt. And I understand normally people be like, well, geez, that goes into that, that woo-woo weirdness. But you go back again and say, but hang on. We've got the craft debris, we've got the genetic engineering, we've got the asteroid bombardment, right? And I should just quickly say, there's something else that happened 780,000 years ago as well. It just happens that's the last time that there's a full magnetic polar reversal on this planet. Now, isn't that uncanny, Jimmy, that you've got a fourth major event, another anomaly, right, that happens exactly at the same time? So things are getting really wacky right at that time.
I want back to the Draco really quick.
Sure.
Sure. The Draco, they were banished from this planet.
They've been pushed back in a war that has happened. There's been a cosmic war.
They haven't been here for how long?
From the understanding, actually, there is a point in Valu's work where she asks one of the people that she's working with, one of these people, the spontaneous kind of memories. And at one point, this person goes, he's also a medium, he goes into a kind of trance, and he is seemingly in contact with the Draco. And he comes through a lot of information, and in there it comes up that they're not totally gone. That they still have an awareness of what we're doing here. They're still somewhere in the nearby cosmic neighborhood in some way, and that they can come in, they can pop in from another dimension, and occasionally do the elements from there. That they can revisit, but they no longer have a fixed presence here. They also clarify that the reptilians are not completely gone, that although there was a bombardment and there was all this done, there's a point where it's clarified, they're all gone now. And no, there's still some here. And of course there's loads of lore about reptilians, loads of, there's claims of people being taken to underground areas, all of that. And so you're finding that is being actually repeated to us from this alien artifact. Is telling us much the same thing, but it's pointing to evidence to validate this. Now that should be deeply concerning for people.
So the Draco and the reptilians, just so I'm understanding, completely separate situation. They may appear to be similar, but we are talking about two different species, two different agendas.
Two different species, yeah. The Draco are described as somewhat dragon-like,
Right.
In that they're quite large. They've got wings. I'm trying to think. Not enormous, but they're certainly bigger than humans. They're large. The reptilians look more human-like, but with obviously scaly skin. I guess people who are familiar with descriptions from ufology and from David Icke's work, have some idea probably of what the imagery is like. So these Draco are significantly different, but they are said to be the creators of the reptilians and some other races. So the reptilians consider these Draco as almost like their gods, their creator gods. These are the ones that originally made them. But even though they've left now, gone into another dimension, of existence, that they still have some kind of allegiance to them. But unfortunately, without their immediate backup, they can't really have the same arrogance, and take on this alliance as they may once have, so that's why there's this situation where they have to agree to hand over the planet, that they're no longer with their more powerful, masters here to help them. So it's very complex,
It is complex. Are we in control now, though? Us as humans, are we in control of our own destiny? And is there an ET presence on this planet now? Which I tend to believe that there is, but is there an ET presence here now, or are we as hybrids? Are we in control?
No, we're not in control. No, we're in some really serious trouble. We have leaders, that are still involved in this worship of the Draco, that consider them to be their gods, who are doing horrific things. A cult system of, feeding the energy of children and stuff to these beings.
Right.
Really horrific stuff. Obviously, people hear about it. You hear about these cults, and the elites are in these weird sex cults, and there's this, satanic child abuse. And all. Right, it's worse than people would imagine. They really are dealing with these other dimensional entities, right? On top of that, of course, you have this stuff about elements of the deep state working with reptilians. That also is one part of the problem. So where are the good guys? Why don't they come racing in? Well, one of the problems is, from their perspective, humanity seems to be working with the wrong side, right? Now, if you were in charge of, say, an opposite force, and you're looking down, you kind of be thinking, am I going to run in to help people that have sided with the enemy, right? So we've put ourselves in a really weird position where, yes, there are forces that are trying to help and are interested in helping. In fact, some of them are here, and some of them look like humans. And remember what we said earlier on when I said about they created the human body to be suitable for them to incarnate into. Now, if anyone knows the work of, say, obviously you're going to be familiar with Bob Lazar's claims. Now, whether people believe everything Bob Lazar said or not, there's some interesting things he comes out with. He says that amongst the documents he encountered at S4, there was a stack of information there about us, about humans, right? And what it said is the aliens that were involved there described us as containers. And they were very specific. They only referred to humans as containers. Containers for what? Containers for extraterrestrial beings, right? Because they can incarnate into us. They know this. And they say they didn't make us. They're quite clear, these beings. They say, look, humans have been modified something like 60 odd times, it said in those records. But it said they didn't do it. But they're aware another alien group did this, right? Which is weird enough. So again, you're getting this recognition that there's multiple parties. And they say, that we're containers. The same narrative that, yes, right from the beginning, we've been created as containers. So who else is coming here? Various beings. So you've got people who look like people, but they're not. The soul level, some of these are not at all. They've got beings that are benevolent, and you've got beings that are very malevolent, and they can both look like a human being, right? That's a terrible situation. So you look at some of these leaders, and you think, looks like a person, but that doesn't mean that they are, right? So that should be considered for anyone. I know the hybrid program, obviously the modern hybrid program is a bit like that, this creation of what seems to be a creation of bodies that are suited to certain souls to live here, which seems to be an ongoing thing, right, with another group, with the insectoids and greys, So again, they seem to view us as containers as well. There seems to be a general agreement between these different beings that the Homo sapiens body is an ideal container, right? That consistency across the different narratives should make people think, why is it that all these different beings, when people have encounters, they seem to be saying much the same thing, that, they consider our bodies as useful containers.
What did you, is there a connection with Maria, the Nazca mummy that is being analyzed by Gaia and the other mummies that have surfaced in Nazca? Is there a connection?
Yeah, there's something that doesn't seem to get discussed in these. If you look at, say, the Atacama mummy, And you look at the ones down in Peru, right? And also, what's another one? Oh, the Star Child skull, right? You look at those three examples. Now, all of them were flagged up as possible aliens, right? But then when the DNA work was done, it comes up as that they have human parents, okay? Now, so that all ended, in, as you know, in a big furor. You know, is this all a fraud? You know, are we just messing with, you know, people's graves and stuff? But what no one seems to discuss is, right, if you take a human embryo and modify it using something like CRISPR gene editing technologies, right, like we have today. But you know, imagine you've got like next generation. But even with the CRISPR technologies, we don't have to like blend in alien DNA to change anything, right? We just start changing the code. So you can create a monster, right, with a human fetus, yeah, just by playing around with the code. Now look at these things. When they're saying they're just humans, look, the Atacama thing is just a normal baby, Jimmy. They're telling us, look at it. It doesn't look normal to me.
Nope.
Look at these. Nope, no, it doesn't. And then you look at the Star Child skull. It's just a normal, you know, freaky kid. I don't think so. You know, the same as you go to these ones down in Peru. You know, they're not normal. But the thing is, they're human, right? That makes perfect sense. If what they're doing is not hybridizing in the way that we typically think of ET hybrids, right? And this is something people have to get their heads around. That we always used to assume that what it was is some sort of mix, you know, like 50% alien, 50% human, you know, that was normal. I used to think that too. But once you start understanding how this genetic engineering works, you realize all you need to do is understand the code, and you can go in and just fiddle around with it, and you can turn a human being into a grey alien, right? You can turn a human being probably into a fish if you really know what you're doing with the embryo, right? You can make pretty much anything. You can start tweaking it. And so these things, I think, yeah, that they are human, but I don't think that they are natural mutations. I think what we're seeing is parts of these experiments, that they're finding these remains and they're finding the anomalies on them are incredible, but that there's no evidence of alien DNA. And I think it's because of that. And in fact, there's a technology, part of CRISPR, called gene drives. And gene drives are really important. I'd say look them up, because they're frightening in a way. Because what they do is they can modify the genes, and then they can change it in such a way as that when a male and female, right, mate, the offspring, instead of having information from both parents, the gene drive overwrites the genes from the other parent.
That's correct.
So
yes.
Yeah, so it doesn't matter like what they breed with or what they mix it. It will always be the one that they wanted it to be. So if you think again about that disappearance of all the humans, right, who had the wrong number of chromosomes, right, all of them went. That's a gene drive technology, right? They wiped out all of the humans that had 48 chromosomes. There's none left today. They went from having probably, you know, a dozen 46 chromosome humans to the whole world. Right? How does that happen? That happens with gene drives. That you can choose to completely, you know, genocide a species with this technology, right? Or you can upgrade a species.
Yeah, override it.
You just override it. And look, I don't know how much time we've got, so I wanted to quickly point out a couple of things as well.
Well, hold on. I'm going to stop you right there. We're going to go into overtime. There's no way we're stopping this conversation right now. But go ahead and say what you needed to say.
Sure, because there's a really important another aspect of this modification that I'd like people to sort of be aware of, because there's a couple of things. One thing is that, you know, in SETI, and particularly in the what they call the post-detection SETI, you know, arm for these. There's a guy there called Professor Paul Davies, right? Now, Professor Paul Davies he's really important. He pops up a lot actually in this stuff because he's kind of critical of SETI, right? He says that, you know, although he's part of it, he says it's the most unlikely way to detect aliens will be through radio signals coming to some, you know, astronomer in SETI. He thinks that's the most unlikely. What's more likely is some kind of anomaly being detected by someone outside of the field, something really strange. It's a persistent anomaly that eventually that person forces onto everyone else. Well, first of all, that sounds awful like what I'm doing. The second thing is, he says, well, now what kind of things would we find, say, if aliens had been through our solar system in the remote past? He says, oh, you might have chopped up asteroids or nuclear waste or changes in the genome that would be able to last a very long time. Now, if you go a bit deeper into that, and you find, what do they expect to find? They say, well, look, if we're going to look for evidence that this has happened, we would need the changes to happen in parts of the genome that are incredibly stable, because DNA mutates, it changes over time. You know, a message or signal could be wiped away. So say the aliens would have to have done a change in an area of what they call highly conserved regions of DNA. And what that really means is there's parts of your genome which are so important to the fundamental processes of life, right? That if they mutate much, you die. You know, you won't have offspring. You know, it's just impossible. And they said that's where they think it will be, because anything changed in there should remain stable over hundreds of thousands or millions of years. So they're saying, look, this is leading SETI people, leading, astrobiologists are saying these are the areas which we look at. Okay, well, let's look at some of those. Because when you go in and you start looking at these areas of highly conserved non-coding DNA, where they expect the message to be if it exists,
right?
It turns out that they've already found these, right? There's these areas called HARs, which stands for Human Accelerated Regions, because they're areas of code that have been suddenly accelerated in their evolution, and all of them are in highly conserved non-coding regions, right? Which is where we're told that we should look for this modification if it's happened, yeah?
Right.
I think they found about 1,000 of them. And I'll give you one example, right? There's one they call HAR1, which was the first one they detected, right? And the woman, I forgot her name, to my shame, I can't remember, but I'll dig it up for you later. But anyway, she goes in, she finds it, and she wants to sort of compare. She's actually a computational biologist, so she computes the stats, what's the chances on things. That's what she's good at. And she looks at this area, and she said it's 118 letters long, 818 DNA letters long. There's a little fragment of code. And she says, if you take a chimp, a chicken, and us, and you can contrast it, right? And they said between a chicken and a chimpanzee, there's 3 letters that are different of the 118, right? So, and keep in mind that they're supposed to be separate by 300 million years, these creatures, right? So that's how stable it is. In 300 million years, you've only got 3 changes.
Right,
yeah?
right.
So they know this area code must do something incredibly important where, it's very rare for a successful mutation to happen. And then they take the humans, right, and they compare them to the chimps. They say, well, look, we're only 5 million years away from the chimps. It's got 18 letters different, right? 18, yeah? And so the woman does the numbers. She crunches the numbers, and she says, statistically speaking, by all the known mechanisms of evolution, the chances of this are 0. 0, right? And nobody flags up, oh, well, isn't this the signal that we've been looking for? No. No mention of it. And now they found like 1,000 of these HARs, these accelerated regions. And nearly all of them, Jimmy, are in areas that affect the brain. Isn't that a funny coincidence?
Yeah.
So you've got all these weird sections of code that you don't understand. They shouldn't be there. And they all make us have a better brain. That's a bit weird.
And the number that we are talking about here, of coincidence, that number would stretch if it was at 12-point type, right? From here to Mars. That's how big of a number that we are talking about. The weird thing
is why aren't they talking about it? Like, is this, I mean, maybe you can help me, because in a way I'm like, well, if they're telling me on the one hand, I can go on there, I can read Paul Davies and these people saying, we should look in the genome for, this non-coding DNA, look in there and see if any of these stable areas have been changed. And then you've got these other scientists with their papers saying, we found all these areas in that area that have been changed. Like, what's going on in the middle there, Jimmy? I don't understand it, because surely they know. So what's going on? Is this a cover-up, or is it just 2 areas not talking to each other? Or, for me, it's very hard to see how I can find that. Like, as you say, I'm an IT guy, right? I'm not a computational biologist. I'm not evolutionary, or exobiologist or any of those things. If I can find that, am I really meant to believe that all of these thousands of scientists in these fields, none of them have noticed?
Well, and see, there's something else to this, and we'll discuss this when we come back, but a geneticist would look at these problems and these issues and sit back and go, wait a minute here. So that they're thinking about it, because it's what they do. Right?
Absolutely.
It's way beyond coincidence. Let's take a break right here, Bruce. We'll do some overtime when we come back, and we'll continue this fascinating discussion here on Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. We're discussing the origins of us. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. You can follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Follow Bruce right now at HybridHumans144 on Twitter. We'll be right back with overtime right after this. Stay with us. Welcome back, Fade to Black. Heading straight into overtime with Bruce R. Fenton. By the way, he's live from Wales right now. And Bruce, a couple of quick points before we move on. What did you? How did it hit you emotionally yesterday when you saw what was happening to Notre Dame?
Yeah, I have mixed views on it. I mean, look, I think any ancient or any old structure, right, is interesting and important. But I see the symbolic side of it as well. That, you know, we're in a time where I think a lot of these institutions, like the Catholic Church, are heading towards the end, and they rightly so. And I think that it was kind of symbolic. The building itself, it looks like it's survived pretty well, to be honest. I mean, and it seems, funnily enough, they had like none of the stuff in there. You know, nothing really seems to have been, you know, the precious stuff seems to be lost. So from my point of view, yeah, I took it as being a rather symbolic. This, you know, the Catholic Church, when their major symbols was on fire, right? So I guess a lot of people I know have been more like, you know, upset about it. I actually sort of think it's kind of a sign of the times. And then maybe there's a bit more symbolic that it's like, you know, this is starting to come down, you know, these big institutions like the church, you know, hopefully a few banks might catch on fire as well. So I'm not as upset. If it had been a library, like a really ancient, great library and not a Catholic church, then I would have been more upset about it, a lot more upset. But because of what it represents to me, which essentially is part of the enemy structure, right? Because at the top level of the Catholic Church, you know, let's just say that these are not people that are helping humanity. So, yeah, I took it that way. You know, again, of course, as I say, the building itself, beautiful, you know, ancient structures, always precious. But yeah, I have a mixed view. And I didn't like the way as well that we've been told to start clapping our hands because all these billionaires have come out saying that they're going to fork out hundreds of millions to fix it. Because what were they doing with that money yesterday, Jimmy? You know what I mean? They've got this spare hundreds of millions and they're stepping over starving kids and stuff and, like, you know, spitting on them. But when it comes to, you know, artwork or buildings, they haven't, you know, there's no problem. You know, I've got hundreds of millions to spend on that. You know, what about on human beings? Why is it they detest humanity so much, but they love buildings and artwork? You know, so that's my view. I have a counter view to a lot of people, but that's the way I look at it. I look at the representation of it.
Sometimes some things need to be said. That's
it's kind of. I'm with you. I know it's not popular view. I know it's not. But.
Well, you know, for me, it's the history of us. No matter what, you know, we have a few things on this planet that you know, it's our history, and that you know, it's 850 years old, and that's I don't want to see stuff go away. Mm-hmm. You know,
no, and look, to be honest, the building, it sounds to me like beyond the roof, but the building is preserved,
right?
You know? So really, I mean, it's yes, they're going to have to rebuild the roof, but all of the actual artifacts, all of the things that could have been burned, it sounds like they were already either out of the place or removed during the fire. So I don't think there's been a catastrophic loss of history. It's going to be just a major repair job.
Now, and thank you for that. And getting back to our discussion right before the break, where I was, you know, referencing, you know, the professional geneticists, those that are looking for markers and understand what it would take to go in and have some type of ancient CRISPR, like you were referencing, technology, to go in and to do a snip. They know that these changes have to have been done by a professional, right? Yeah. Our science today is just now starting to figure out these mutations and how we can modify DNA so we can improve things or change things and diseases, whatever, hair and eye color for that matter. But these modifications that happened in the past had to have been done by a professional, and that's what they understand because they know how difficult it is, right?
Absolutely. And again, you start seeing some of the descriptions. I really think they're hinting to us that they know this, right? Because first of all, I mentioned to you earlier about the paper where they said it looked like, you know, a fragment had been cut out, Xeroxed and put in. Like, right. Why would a scientist use a term like that, Xeroxed? Isn't that like flagging up to you that they think something technological has been going on here? And then if you look at this HR1, if you don't mind, I'll briefly read a couple of paragraphs from Catherine Pollard, PhD, the biostatistician who first found it, right? And see if you see, you know, reading between the lines what she seems to be telling us. Like the first one, she says, The fact that HAR1 was essentially frozen in time through hundreds of millions of years indicates that it does something very important. That it then underwent abrupt revision in humans suggests that the function was significantly modified in our lineage, right? So that's the first one. Now that sounds a little bit like, firstly, like they're hinting at something.
Right.
And then she goes on to say, again, and this one I think is more to the point. She says, the way to evolve a human from a chimp human ancestor is not to speed the ticking of the molecular clock as a whole. Rather, the secret is to have rapid change occur in sites where those changes make an important difference in organisms' functioning. Doesn't it start sounding like someone who's saying that someone's come in, this is how you evolve a human, this is what you need to do? You know what I mean? It's like, hang on, aren't we talking about natural random processes?
Right.
That language doesn't sound like it, does it?
No, she didn't suggest it. She said that is what happened.
Yeah, and that's how you would do it. That if we were going to do it, that's what we'd be looking to do. And the thing is, it's what they've realized that these changes, they're not in genes, right? Whereas in the past, we've always focused on genes. But what they found instead is that nearly all these changes are in what they call genetic switches. And genetic switches are the areas of the DNA code that control how much a gene expresses. So just to clarify for people, what that means is that, so let's say you've got a gene for your arm. Now, there'll be switches that control how strongly that information expresses. So how long your arm is, how big it is, right? So instead of putting a different gene in, what you do is you go in and you modify the code in the switch, because then that can now make you have a longer arm, a shorter arm, no arm. You can just turn it off.
Right,
you don't have an arm, right? So we're starting to just realize, right, that it's not about genes. But it looks like somebody else is a long way ahead of us, because they don't come in and just start. They do splice in some genes, right? We have got genes in our system. They're called horizontal gene transfer, right? Which means there's genes in humans that came from other species, right? When some of them are from bacteria, other animals. It's like quite strange, but it's at least 100 and something genes have been detected now, which are not from ancestors. So that happens as well. But what they've realized is the main thing is not adding genes. It is going in and fiddling around with these switches. And so it looks like somebody is well away, ahead of us, because they know the code so well that they can go in and change these areas. As the woman said, right, that normally those areas are frozen in time, because they're so crucial, that if we tried to do that now, you can be absolutely certain we would kill the fetus, right? It will come out so messed up, right? Because we do not understand these switches at all. But someone has come in and changed like 1,000 of them without a problem, without it leading to our extinction. Whereas we'd be scared to mess with one of those because they're so fundamental to life. Like, how far ahead is that? And I actually think the lesson in this might be that it might actually frighten the scientists that are working with CRISPR enough to realize we are thousands of years behind whoever did that. And that if we try and replicate that, we're more likely to make ourselves extinct than to upgrade ourselves.
And now, to understand the significance of this, if we had the ability to go in, say, with a chimp, right, which is about as close to us as we have out there, right? Okay, we go in and modify a chimp's DNA for them to have speech, right? To go in and modify, we would understand how technically advanced that would be to go in, do a snip, and then suddenly tomorrow all chimps speak. Now, that would be a pretty astounding step and leap forward in science today. Suddenly we've got chimps speaking. Of course, the vision of Planet of the Apes comes to mind. But that is essentially what happened with us. It is just the same significance, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes, absolutely. And like you just said, I think that's a good way of putting it, because you imagine that one mind-boggling scenario of us upgrading chimps to speak tomorrow, but instead they've upgraded a chimp-like creature, some ancestor, an early hominin, primate, whatever. These are little chimp-like beings that they have taken. And they have turned it not only to, saying they can speak, but, it's this upright walking, hairless, speaking, complex society. They have done the incredible. They've done, the speech and, dozens of things to us where we are now completely different. And one of the things they did, and you touched on something earlier on, you said about how we look very different and, that we're hairless and, the features of the face. Like one of the things that's really funny is if you look at a baby chimpanzee, right, and you put it against a young human, right, you'll see actually that they're really similar. The major differences between us and a chimp are in the adult stage, right, because that's when the jaw goes forward and they get the brow ridges and they get really hairy, So what they did, like they basically turned off our adulthood. It was amongst the changes they did, they stopped us becoming adults. So what we have is juvenile ape features, right? So instead of ever getting that protruding jaw, that's been turned off. We just get a baby ape face, right? So, and you think when they're born, they're basically pretty hairless, right? So we don't get hair. We're born as a fetus, right? And then we continue to develop for a little while after that, but we retain our childhood features, and it's called neoteny. It's called increased neoteny, and they've realized that we're basically what's called a neotenic ape. That it seems that someone has just turned off adulthood for us because young creatures are more flexible in their minds, right? They can learn more. We know that even our children, look how much easier they learn and how flexible their minds are. So they've extended our childhood throughout our lifetime. And one of the reasons you can see that's happened again is if you think about it, right, nearly everyone has problems with their teeth, right, because you've got too many teeth to fit in your mouth, right? So people have to have their wisdom teeth taken out, or they have really crooked teeth, and like loads of people got braces. That's because they switched off our elongated jaw that came with adulthood, but we still have the same number of teeth, right? Because evolution hasn't caught up yet, because it was that sudden. If it was a gradual thing, we wouldn't have those extra teeth. They just switched it off, but we're still growing them. Yeah. So they said evolution is just starting now, that people are being born who don't have wisdom teeth, right? It's just starting to catch up because they went in, they just like, right, turn that off, turn this on, turn this off, modify this. And they created us as this kind of weird, eternally young ape with all these extra modifications. And yeah, it's bizarre. It's totally bizarre. And you start seeing, when you, like me, geeking into the science of it, you start to realize, what changes they did and how they've made us. And it makes sense. You know what I mean? It's one of these things. It's like, oh yeah, I get that now. It's that weird.
Well, with anthropologists and anthropology in general, studying us and how we got here and linguistics and everything else in society, I understand that. But we've had those genetic changes in us for us to develop governments and religions and laughter and comedy and sadness and all of these things that make us today. Mm-hmm. But what's the excuse that they have that chimps or apes have not evolved along the same timeline? Why aren't they speaking? Why aren't they building houses and computer systems? And I know that these are stupid, fundamental questions, but it's the obvious. Why haven't those same changes happen naturally if they are trying to say to us that all of this was natural?
Yeah, I mean, and that's argument to put a lot, but I think it's actually got worse because they used to be able to give, a kind of reasonable answer to that. But now it's worse, Jimmy, because think about it. Now we've got these humans, right? Like in the Philippines and in Homo naledi in Africa, who are supposed to be Homo, genus like us, but they look like kind of chimps, right? So it used to be they said, well, the chimps had gone down a different evolutionary line and, they're specialized where they live and, we can't compare chimps to humans. All right, fine, I'll accept that. What about these other humans then that you'll find on these islands who seem to be like weird chimps? Yeah. So why aren't they like us?
Well, what about Neanderthal?
So that argument is, so now they can't really easily reject that argument anymore because there's these other Homo that haven't turned into us at all.
There's Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon as well.
Well, they're closer to us, but if you look at Naledi and like you said, the one in the Philippines, I mean, they're like 3 foot something high with like chimpanzees and stuff. So, right. I mean, that for the scientific model is a real problem, because they're living like really near to modern humans.
50,000
what the hell is going on?
Yeah, 50,000
years ago, and on islands where you only have to swim like to the next island, isn't it, pretty much? And there's modern humans. Like, how on earth does it make sense if we're all Homo and we're all evolving naturally towards, modern humans, supposedly, but then you go to an island and there's just these little chimp people, right? So it doesn't stack up anymore. And then when they found Homo naledi in South Africa, they looked at them and they said, well, these are obviously 2 million year old fossils. And then when they got them dated, they were 200,000 years old. And they couldn't believe it because they said they were so archaic and they're living in South Africa where there's modern humans, right? So surely they would have evolved just like us if it's natural.
That's right.
But they haven't.
That's
They
right.
haven't at all. They're
That's
just
right.
these weird little ape men, right? So we're finding pockets of what humans would have looked like if natural evolution had continued. And basically, they've hardly changed from chimp men, right?
I know. It reminds me of My Cousin Vinny, the movie, when Marissa Tomei says, the defense's case doesn't hold water.
No, it doesn't.
It just doesn't hold water.
Fast.
Yeah,
It's
it doesn't hold
real
water.
fast.
Well, you mentioned earlier, and I want to give you a chance to take this a little bit further. When, these are what I think all of us consider the days of disclosure, where we're getting really close to something breaking wide open. I don't know what it's going to be or when it's going to happen, but I feel the pressure of where we are today, and it's a great time for us to be us. But are you suggesting that it may not necessarily come from the skies or some, everybody talks about a flying saucer in the White House lawn, that it may actually come from the historical record, and that's where the definitive proof may come from?
I do. I think that what's happened here is that this object that has been activated very deliberately by these intelligences because they understand we're never going to get disclosure in the way that we're hoping it will come, right? It's never going to come on the platter from the deep state, and they're just going to hand it all over to us, right? There's going to be some elements of it. We know, it's bubbling up. There's some stuff. Yes, there'll be some stuff, but they'll control the narrative. Someone else is stepping in and saying, no, we control the narrative, right? And I think that's what's happening. I think they see these things happening. They know that, yes, there's going to be some tested debris coming out in the next few months. There's going to be probably some more disclosures on human origin. Look, if we look at, say, for example, let's look at TTSA, right? Because obviously that's what's hot right now, that they are dealing with craft debris. They've got a book series which tackles some of the same stuff I tackle. Like book 3 of Gods is supposed to tackle the origins of humans, right? So what do you think they're going to come out with? I'm going to tell you they're going to come out with more or less exactly what I'm telling you, aren't they? Because right, but I'm just telling you it now, and I'm not in the deep state, right? I'm not in any of that. I've just done it on my own, like as a geek who's into these things and who has contactee experiences, who's connected to people in the experience of contactee community that has led me to this information. It's quite clear to me that the intelligence, these beings, want us to know what actually happened without some deep state narrative put over the top of it. If people want to wait for that disclosure, that's fine. But I would say that anyone who's listened properly to our conversation, Jimmy, has already had disclosure. Because what else do you want? I'm giving you all the genetic data. I'm giving you craft debris. Like, if people still say, but I need it to come from a CIA agent, well, then I can't help you.
Well, now that it actually brings up a very perplexing problem, and not only for TTSA, but for all of us. And
Sure.
and I'll say it like this: TTSA is its foundation is the military-industrial complex and the CIA and secret government agencies and programs. That is something that I do not trust, and most of this community does not either, or most of the world, for that matter. So,
sure. I mean, we know they're professional secret keepers, at least, if not professional liars, some of them.
That's right. That's
part of their job, and it's not to slander them in personal terms, but, that's the job you do.
That's what they are. Yes.
It's the job.
Yep.
So we're not supposed to really completely trust people in those fields. That's not to say that they can't have good interest or do good stuff. I do think TTSA is going to come out with some interesting stuff, and it's probably going to bring forth as much as they can. I've got no reason to say that they are just going to totally, fudge it. But also, how deep does their access go? I mean, it's been admitted that ATIP didn't have, special access project status, right? So it's not totally deep state. Yeah. It's fairly surface level. So, I'm sure there's probably networks into the deeper state, but,
as it stands, there's no reason to think that the really deep projects, are going to come up and start saying, hey, yeah, we've got all this genetic engineering going on, and we've got alien bodies, or, I don't think that's going to happen right now. Do you? I mean, that looks unlikely.
No, I don't. It would have already happened, and it's not going to happen on History Channel. I can tell you that right now. It's just not going to do that.
I think the extraterrestrial intelligences, look, they're doing this themselves. I couldn't possibly be here with this data if they hadn't done that triggering of this device and giving the information to someone that's been passed on to me, right? That couldn't have happened. My wife and I are both contactees experiences. My wife has had extensive abductions, but these abductions are unlike most abductions. She's been taken to, I don't even know if it's a parallel reality, what it is, but taken seems to be through time to Palenque in the 7th century. She had about 100 journeys, right, to this city, which is, if you know Eric von Daniken's work, The Lid of Pacau.
I have it. I have The Lid of Pacau right here in the studio.
That's where she was taken continually. Every few days, right, every few nights, she would find herself what felt like being pulled through the wall, and she would find herself inhabiting the body of a very, very tall Mayan lady, right, who was one of the members of the elite in Palenque in the 7th century under Pacau. Pacau was not human. These are hybrids. They were all hybrids, the elite. They were typically around 2 meters to 2.5 meters tall, right? And if anyone wants to check that out, you think, can that be validated? Right. Have a look at the engravings of the Temple of the Foliated Cross at Palenque, and you'll see the leaders are portrayed, right, with their servants next to them, and the servants are standing on boxes, right, giant boxes, and they're still a head and shoulders shorter than them, right? So this isn't just something we're putting out of nowhere. And in these experiences, underneath the city, there were areas with labs, and in these labs, there's these Pleiadian hybrids. In some of them operating. In other areas of the city in labs, there are tall greys, right, doing experiments, creating some sort of weird super soldiers and all sorts of strange stuff. And there's this whole weird thing going on there. My wife, look, again, I don't expect people to just say, okay, I just believe this, right? But I'm going to say that this is how we actually got pulled into a lot of this stuff, is the events that we had. I've had a lot of events myself, and these Pleiadians were there. And they started saying to her, look, you're actually, you and your husband are connected to us. You have a soul history connection to us. Again, don't expect people to believe this. I don't necessarily just swallow things that they say, but they've said that they consider us to be members of their alliance and on Earth. And that's not what they've said. I'm not going to put my hat on it because, again, I can't prove it. But they then start transferring information to us. And that has led to this connection that we had with this other person who had this contact experience with Al Chiringa and all this information. So there's a complex backstory, and obviously I can't fit it all into this one conversation with you, but I've tried to obviously focus on what's most important. But yeah, we've been getting a lot of content. We've had a lot of stuff happen. There's a reason why we've got to a point where I have so much data that I can sit here and confidently tell you I've graphed debris, talk about specific genes and fusions. And, this hasn't just come out of nowhere. This is, this years of things that have been going on for myself and my wife, and our connections with a lot of people who are not ordinary people as well.
Now, where can everybody? We've got about 60 seconds left, Bruce,
Sure.
And I do want to thank you in advance for not only a fascinating conversation, but some of the most fun I've had on this show, acquiring knowledge in a very long time. So, thank you for that. Where can everybody go get both books, both The Forgotten Exodus and, of course, Hybrid Humans?
Sure. I mean, both are available on Amazon. So, if they want to get them either on ebook or print, they're both on Amazon. Obviously, there's a book website, hybridhumans.net. They can go on there to get some more details and get copies of that one. My personal website, brucefenton.info. There's details about Into Africa. But yeah, really, at the moment, they can go to Amazon. If they contact me, I can actually post out a copy, signed copies, if someone wants one. And they can email me. Contact me through Twitter, Facebook, or email at bruce@brucefenton.info. So if they want a signed copy. I will forewarn as well that this book, Hybrid Humans, will only be available for another 3 months because I have a book deal, which means it will be coming off the market, and a rewritten, elongated version will come out next year. So if anyone wants to get some of the lowdown of this now and not have to wait till April or something next year, I would suggest, hurrying it along within the next 2 or 3 months.
Thank you so much, Bruce. Fascinating conversation, and I highly recommend both books. I just finished Hybrid Humans, and it was just absolutely amazing. And this conversation tonight, I can't wait to continue it with you. Thank you so much, Bruce, and be safe out there.
Thank you very much.
Bruce R. Fenton. Again, both links for Bruce and his wife, Daniela Fenton, are at jimmychurchradio.com. That's brucefenton.info and hybridhumans.net. You can follow Bruce on Twitter at hybridhumans144. And that concludes another episode of Fade to Black. Fade to Black's executive producer is Rita Camarion. Show is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee, Dennis, and Bob. Announcers are Steve Harder, Gene Vito, and Mark D. Kovar. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music, Doug Aldrich. Intro, Spaceboy, spaceboymusic.com. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network, and syndication is KGRA, The Planet. This broadcast owned and copyrighted 2019 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Follow me on Twitter right now at JChurchRadio. I want to remind everyone, tomorrow night, right here, psychic and medium Karen Reese. And yes, we will be taking your phone calls. Until tomorrow night, I want everybody to be safe. Go Beckley Tepe.